Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino?
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. Lots to talk about this Saturday morning, including the plan to oust Kemi Badenoch. We'll speak to one of our MPs in just a second to see what he thinks. Rayner on the rampage after pressing Rachel Reeves to hike taxes. The Deputy Prime Minister clashing with the Chancellor, and Starmer on cuts. And the story, to be brutally honest, I am most interested in this morning is one about the Metropolitan Police, a Jewish protester who was charged over a placard mocking the leader of Hezbollah. He was asked on a number of occasions if he believed the image would offend clearly pro-Hezbollah and anti-Israel activists. Do you know what? If you're pro-Hezbollah, I am fairly sure that you're advocating terrorism, because Hezbollah are a terrorist organisation. I don't care if you are offended, to be brutally honest. We'll talk about that in just a second. Hezbollah, of course, a terror group prescribed in the UK. We'll talk about zoos a bit later on as well, new government policy on those to make them safer. What do you think about zoos in general? Do you think they're a good thing? Do you go there? Are they something a nice day out with the kids, or are they a cruel thing? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. And we'll talk to the award-winning journalist Sean O'Neill. He is of the Times and has won many, many awards for his brilliant and campaigning journalism about the horrendous story about his daughter who had ME and is someone who died as a result of that, and complications in regard to that. He's done fantastic campaigning work on that. You're going to want to hear that interview a little bit later on in the programme. Let me know your thoughts on all these stories. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get your voice on the air between now and 1 o'clock. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me, and Twitter seems to be working again, which is great. There was a problem yesterday with all of Twitter. Apparently not anymore. Tweets seem to be coming through. I've got some of them already this morning. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can also send me a voice note. Tech Up Dave is standing by to listen to your voice notes and play them out. Less than a minute, please. 0344 499 1000. The same number that you can use to send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring this morning. Lots to discuss. You can see the phones going already. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, John Cooper is a Conservative MP for Dumfries and Galloway and joins me now to talk through the stories of the day. John, you're very welcome to the programme. How are you this morning?
Good morning. Yes, very well, thank you. Although the weather has changed, it's been lovely for weeks now, and suddenly it's pouring rain this morning. So
same down here in London, a little bit grey. Perhaps like the prospects of Kemi Badenoch, there are many reports that the grassroots plot revealed their grassroots plot to oust Kemi Badenoch, Association Chairman of the Conservative Party, understood to be considering a confidence motion against Kemi Badenoch, similar to the pressure put on Theresa May to quit in 2019. Several have told the Times newspaper this morning they wanted to act as MPs were willing but unable to remove Badenoch although a growing number of shadow ministers privately think she should go. Are you willing but unable to remove Kemi Badenoch, John?
So I think we're always going to face these things, and we came off again a very poor election generally, and we also have had a series of elections in England which again were very bad. We lost 674 very good councillors, and Kemi has apologised for that. So we're always going to have these tensions. There's no doubt about that. And the Conservative Party famously doesn't hang about. Leaders have got to perform, simple as that. But I think Kemi is doing a good job. I think particularly at Prime Minister's questions, she's very good. She's holding.
Really, I think some of them she's been very weak. She was good this week, but it's very patchy. I watch it every single week.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it's that is a tough gig. There's no doubt about that. It's very tough, and I think she has improved. And I think Keir Starmer's quite flat-footed, and he's heavily reliant on his big book of answers. And I think Kemi's quite good at exploiting that. But we're always going to have these tensions. And of course, in the wings is Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Minister, is doing an excellent job. So people always assume that he's still on manoeuvres and that he's gunning for the top job.
Do you think he's on manoeuvres?
We've got a really good top team.
Do you think he's on manoeuvres?
I don't think so. I backed Rob in the leadership election. I thought Rob had a really good, clear plan. But
so you think he'd be a better leader than Kemi Badenoch, John?
I think the top team, the two together, is actually very effective at the moment. I think Rob is making the running. Just things have fallen in the Justice brief, and I think Rob's doing a really great job. He was talking this week. I was behind him in Parliament when he was talking about plans to change sentencing in England and Wales and shorten sentencing, which is incredible, and let some really serious, violent criminals out into something called an outdoor prison or something. It's absolute nonsense.
Let's talk about that more in a second, actually, because we've been talking about that on my drive time shows. I'm presenting Drive last week and this week between 4 and 7. We'll maybe talk a little bit more about those sentencing reforms. But just one more question on the leadership. I mean, what does it say less than a year into her time as leader of the Conservative Party? I mean, it's barely been 7 or 8 months and Kemi Badenoch already having trouble. And interesting that you said, you immediately mentioned Robert Jenrick there, and that's fine, you backed him, and I think he is a very effective opposition politician, but probably more effective than the leader of your party.
The way things have fallen, as I say, a lot of things have fallen in that Justice brief, and Rob's
he talked about quite a few issues that are maybe not quite in the Justice brief as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very good politician. He's an all-round politician, and I think, as I say, it is an echo of what's happened in the general election. We in the Conservative Party are dealing with a crisis, and one of the things I think that we probably generally it was felt that we'd have a bit of time on the ball, as it were. And because Labour have been so absolutely dreadful since they came into power, the focus has swung on to us and what would we do? And we're being asked for policy decisions now, when normally I don't think anybody would be listening to us for at least another couple of years. So yeah, the pressure is on, there's no doubt about that.
Let's talk about the Justice brief that Robert Jenrick has and that sentencing reform. You hinted at it there, you talked a little bit about those shorter sentences. We've heard about chemical castration for paedophiles, for example. That's just one idea. I don't think it'll actually happen on a wide scale. But in terms of what David Gauke, the former Justice Secretary, someone who was a Conservative Justice Secretary, was saying there, what do you make of those proposals this week? A lot of people not too happy with the fact that many criminals, and some quite serious criminals, as you say correctly, could be back on our streets sooner.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we've seen a taste of this in Scotland, because Scotland, with a different justice system, actually has a presumption against short sentences already. And there's lots of talk about justice journeys and not calling prisoners prisoners, but calling them residents, which is just incredible stuff. The difficulty with all this is it undermines public confidence in the justice system. That's the biggest difficulty. And yes, there are pressures on prisons, and we need to address that, but we need to address that quickly, and we need to do that by building more prisons, not by letting sex offenders particularly out and about. And I raised this issue in Parliament, and I was told that I was talking rubbish, but I think the public get this. They realise that we have got a soft touch justice system, both in Scotland and in coming soon to England too.
There is a clear problem that not enough prison places exist in England. Over 14 years, the Conservatives only added 500 prison places. They have a record of failure too, don't they?
Unquestionably, we need more prison places, and the difficulty is with looking back all the time is Labour are in charge now, so what are they going to do? They can't keep pointing backwards. We need to look forwards now. What are they going to do?
It's proved a fairly effective strategy for them to say, blame the Tories for the last 14 years. That's something that they've done quite a lot, and the public are on board because you're fourth in at least one poll in the latest YouGov opinion poll, and the Conservatives aren't making ground. We've seen no ground has been made. In fact, you've lost an awful lot of councillors in the local elections. So simply by saying over 14 years you failed to do this, that and the other, it's actually quite an effective strategy by Labour, is it not?
It's been effective so far, but it only gets them so far because people are realising now that the decisions that Labour are taking are beginning to bite. And if you look around, that's happening in lots of areas, not least in the economy. Their jobs tax is hitting hiring, particularly for young people, particularly for people seeking that first job. And I've seen that right across my constituency in rural Dumfries and Galloway. We don't have a lot of big industries, we've got a lot of small SMEs, and they're all saying to me that they might have been taking on 1, 2, maybe 3 people. That's all come to a halt, and that's having a real effect on people. And that's down largely to things like the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, which adds costs. And yes, they've increased the minimum wage, which is broadly good news, but they pretend that that's government money. It's not government money. It's businesses that are having to find that money, and that's very, very difficult at this time.
Let me just put a couple of the texts that are coming in, 87222 with the word talk in your text. Leslie in Rugby says, another change of leader will not encourage people like me to go back to voting Conservative. It needs guarantees that the wets are gone and they will follow Conservative values, no more woke rubbish. Another person says, Kemi is not strong enough to be Conservative leader. She doesn't have what it takes. What would you say to those two texters, John?
So I think the usual question again is, will a change of leadership, would that help in some way? And it's difficult. There are difficult choices here. And Lord Ashcroft, who is supporting the Conservative Party again, having been out for a while, he said that he would withdraw his support if we were to change leader again. So it's a very, very difficult decision. And as I say, we need to see progress. And as I say, I think Kemi's got to get wired in. We've got elections coming up here in Scotland for Holyrood, and I think we've got a big threat up here from Reform. And again, as ever, the SNP who want to break up Britain, which would affect every one of us, not just the Scots, it would affect everyone in Britain, and we've got to fight back hard on that. And I think we've got a good message, and I think we can do that. We can win.
How do you do that against the SNP on one side, but you're looking over your shoulder at Reform UK on the other side in Scotland? Wales is another issue, another place where Reform could do even better. In fact, there are polls that would suggest that Reform UK could become the main opposition in Scotland.
Yeah, so I mean, that's really troubling because they're one note Reform, and they don't have a fleshed out policy. And I think we do need to tackle the question of immigration. As I said, I live in and represent rural Dumfries and Galloway, where immigration is not directly a huge issue, but it does trouble people. It worries people on the doorsteps, and they understand that the untrammeled flood of illegal immigrants into this country is wrong, and we've got to address that. And the Tory party are coming up with proper, sensible answers about how we deal with that, not simple knee-jerk stuff.
Let me just ask you about the story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. This is about a Jewish protester charged over a placard mocking the leader of Hezbollah. This is a person arrested by the Metropolitan Police after he briefly held a placard satirising the Hezbollah terrorist leader. The British man, who asked the Telegraph to remain anonymous for his safety, was detained and charged last September over a cartoon that showed Hassan Nasrallah, the Lebanese terror chief, with a pager and the words beep, beep, beep. Obviously, those pagers went off. They killed many Hezbollah terrorists. The placard satirising that targeted Israeli attack in which explosives and pagers and walkie-talkies killed 42 people. Nasrallah survived that. He was killed in an airstrike a week later. Not too many tears for me over his death, I must say. But during questioning, police repeatedly asked the man, who was part of a counter-demonstration against a pro-Palestinian march, if he believed the image would offend clearly pro-Hezbollah and anti-Israeli activists. What on earth is going on in the Metropolitan Police?
It's quite incredible, isn't it? It's just jaw-dropping. As you say, Hezbollah and Hamas are both terrorist organisations, and if you're a supporter of that, then you're a supporter of terrorism and murder and all that goes with that, and that's nonsense. I think the right to protest in this country, I think we all stand four square behind that. There's no difficulty with that. But this is absolutely incredible, really jaw-dropping, and I cannot believe that this has happened. And we saw similar issues as well with free speech, and there are suggestions of things like that there's going to be hate crimes for calling out these people. It's absolutely nonsense. We've got to get a grip. And the police in Scotland have got a great thing called breach of the peace, which is an all-encompassing charge, and it allows them to take sensible decisions, and it does come down to police judgment, of course, but it allows them to take sensible decisions. So issues such as people burning Qurans and things like that, it's wrong, it's nasty, but we shouldn't have, it shouldn't be a hate crime, but it could be potentially, in certain circumstances, breach of the peace, for instance. And I think we just need the police to be a lot more sensible. How we've come to this point is beyond belief.
Thank you, John. That's John Cooper, the MP for Dumfries and Galloway. He's a Conservative. His party colleague Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, said what had happened to this Jewish protester was two-tier policing in action. In recent times, the police have failed to act when confronted with protesters calling for jihad and intifada in London. Yet this man was apparently arrested because he might have offended supporters of a banned terrorist organisation. This is two-tier policing in action, says Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary. The law is rightly clear that supporting banned terrorist groups, inciting violence, inciting racial hatred or harassing people is illegal. Beyond that, free speech applies to everyone. The police sometimes turn a blind eye when applying the law. Might be difficult, yet over police. At other times, the law should be applied equally to all, robustly and without fear or favour. That is not what happened here. Ashley is on the line from London. First caller of the day, 0344 499 1000. Ashley, what do you think of this protester who was arrested and indeed charged, went through an 8-month ordeal because he held a placard that might offend people who were pro-terrorists?
Look, let's be honest. Let's be honest, Peter. The whole thing's a joke. I mean, as a British Jew, you see things like this, and all you feel about put two-tier justice to one side. It's just you want suppression of free speech. The Jewish community have had that since the 7th of October. You know, we don't know where we stand. We can't say anything, can't do anything. We can't associate with Israel because we are genocidal. We are on the wrong side of everything, and every Jew is, the people can say, hold up banners of genocidal thoughts and river to the sea, intifada, global intifada, which we saw in Washington.
We did, and there are consequences, Ashley, as you know far better than I do. There are consequences when people say globalize the intifada. They think that's a slogan. They think that's consequence free, and then we see those horrendous murders of Israeli embassy workers in Washington this week. I want the police to be against terrorists, not asking someone who held up a sign saying if he believed the image would offend people who support terrorists. This is the Metropolitan Police. This is Britain 2025.
Yeah, I mean, we're being told as communities, it's like, be careful when you go out. I mean, I worry about my kids. I really genuinely, look, I'm not a religious guy. I'm not unsympathetic to the fact of innocent people being killed, but I'm also sympathetic to the fact that there's a massive problem, but Israel has a right of existence. And for me to be able to stand up and say that, and then someone wants to shoot me because I feel that way, yes, is ridiculous. And the police do absolutely, genuinely, what do? They go round for, they'll send 6 people round to arrest someone for a few emails to the school. Yeah. But people every other week, and it's not everyone. I think everyone has the right to protest and everything.
I agree. And Hamas don't want people. I mean, this is the difference. This is why we are a society, Ashley, where we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of assembly, we have freedom of protest, and those people can go out and say till they're blue in the face that they believe that, Palestine should be a state, that they believe that Israel is bad. That's fine as long as they're not breaking the law. But there are loads of people, you know it and I know it, who are supporting Hamas, who are supporting Hezbollah on that. And here we have police officers repeatedly asking someone if he was worried that he was offending people who were for the terrorists. Those people, I don't care if they're offended, they're supporting terrorism.
Well, surely they should actually arrest the people that are offended. Maybe they're affiliated to these organisations. But it's not uncommon. Look, it happened through the 30s against the Jews. It's demonisation. There's a lot of investment that clearly gone into this and the narrative. And as I said, you've got a lot of people protesting. And I understand. They see babies on TV and the way it's promoted. And I understand people doing that. But when you start calling for the other side to be removed, to be killed, there's actually a TikToker, and it'd be an interesting one to you to look at maybe. But there's a TikToker over in, I think he's over in the States, that he's released a video basically condoning and saying that the DC shootings were legitimate because they were Zionists, and he's got 3 million followers, this guy, right? So irrespective of how he feels personally, he's got 3 million people that follow him. And what's going to happen all over the world? There's going to be kids that are going to go around. There are people with extreme views. This actually glorifies the fact of going out and actually killing people. And I just, look, I'm proud to be British. I was born here, 5th generation here, right? So my country is here.
Yes.
I don't control anything. I mean, I've got no control over what happens abroad. Yet, if I stood there,
you're held responsible for it simply because of your religion. It's outrageous.
Yeah, I could say I support Israel. It's Israel's right to exist. I might not agree with everything clearly that they
feel exactly the same way, Ashley. Exactly the same way.
Yeah, just by saying that, I put myself at risk of actually me and my family of being berated, but also harmed because my view. These anti-racists are actually racist. So I've never seen a time like it. I'm 53 years old, and I look at it. I think the world's gone mad.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ashley. Yeah. Listen, thank you for your call, and I wish you and your family well as well. Thank you for that. And we're going to talk about this a bit later on. We've got Jonathan Sacerdoti. We're going to talk to him, the Jewish journalist. We're also going to speak to Lord Wolney, who was, until Keir Starmer axed the role, he was an advisor to the government on political extremism. So you just draw your own conclusions as to why that role was axed. Lots of people getting in touch about the Conservative Party as well. Brad in Cambridge says, as you know, I'm an ex-member of the Conservative Party. They allowed this woke, liberal, globalist mess to happen on their watch. I'm now solidly with Reform, as long as they can keep to their promises. Sharon in Staffordshire says, good morning, Peter. Why hasn't Gary Lineker been arrested for what he said and did on social media? Says Sharon in Staffordshire. I actually don't think he should be arrested for that, but I do think that he should have been sacked from the BBC. Ian, tell me if you disagree. Ian in Didsbury says, if Angela Rayner were to become Prime Minister, can you picture her sitting in the White House trying to negotiate with Trump and Vance? She would be toast. Well, we'll get our debate desk panellist view on all of that in just a second. Peter Barnes and Andy Williams will be with us in just a second here on Talk.
And so one thing that we've done recently, which is desperately needed, is we've done a report on the grooming gangs, basically showing the facts of it, showing that it is majority Muslim, it's majority Asian grooming gangs, and the victims are white. And we've gone into why this has been shoved under the rug, why this has been neglected, and it's mostly because of political pressure and, you know, the authorities turning the other way.
What is the nature of the political pressure? Have we worked it out yet?
I think they're worried about being called racist.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks to everybody who has been in touch on Twitter, including Amy, who says, I think the plot to oust Kemi Badenoch will only grow, especially at Conservative Party conference, with any potential contenders asking for support if any leadership bid happens. And then, when her year is up, I think letters of no confidence will go into the 1922 committee. Amy, I think you're absolutely spot on. I spoke to a senior Conservative, former Cabinet Minister, still an MP, recently, in the last sort of 3 weeks or so, who said, look, Kemi Badenoch could do all the things people want her to do. She could cure cancer, she could walk on water, she could revive the spirit of Margaret Thatcher, and at the same time people would be talking about her future at Conservative Party conference. I'm going to be there in Manchester. It's going to be a really, really interesting time for Conservative politicians, certainly, and for people following this. Conservatives languishing at fourth in the polls. What is the future of Kemi Badenoch? What should the future be? Is it something you care about? Would a different leader make you vote Conservative? Someone like Robert Jenrick, perhaps, or maybe there's someone else that you can think of. The return of Boris Johnson, perhaps? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Angela's been in touch on Twitter as well and says, good morning, Peter. When Tony Blair first got voted in, the country boomed with optimism. My mother declared herself much better off and switched to voting Labour. However, this Labour government feels pure doom and gloom. They feel like two different parties, with the left waiting to depose a weak flip-flop Prime Minister at any time. James has been in touch and says the killing, injuring and displacing of innocent Palestinian children, women and men is not simply trying to defend. What Netanyahu is doing and what has been doing is an act of terror, and no amount of spinning will change that. It's evil, says James. And thank you to Dave, who's been in touch and says, I'm 63 years old and really confused as to why there's so much hatred towards Jewish people. What have they ever done wrong? What a beautiful world this would be if everyone just learned to respect each other. Religion seems to cause more and more problems. Kind of reminds me of the thoughts of the American satirist Jon Stewart, who once said, religion, giving people hope in a world torn apart by religion. Let's go to the debate desk and Andy
How
Williams.
do you follow that?
Andy Williams and Peter Barnes are with me, political commentators, both Peter Barnes, political strategist as well. Lots to discuss today. Let's talk about the Conservative Party and Kemi Badenoch. Lots of people getting in touch about that. Andy.
Well, I mean, if Kemi Badenoch didn't exist, would you invent her? Not exactly. I don't know how much you heard of what John Cooper was saying there. One of our MPs, he wasn't exactly saying, do you know what, Kemi's the best, she's marvellous, she's brilliant, people need to get behind her, she's a wonderful leader, she's done all these amazing things. It was kind of, I mean, he kept mentioning Robert Jenrick as well. Okay, in fairness to John, he supported Robert Jenrick when Robert Jenrick ran, so maybe you'd expect him to do that. But one thing you don't often hear when you're talking to Conservatives is, do you know what, that Kemi Badenoch, she's brilliant. That's because they don't believe it, and because she isn't. So if you look at the Times piece overnight, looking at, is there going to be some kind of grassroots rebellion, you know, a local Conservative association's going to start trying to circle the wagons and depose her. I mean, one shadow minister said to the Times, she's just not up to it. And we can overanalyse it all we like, but people in Westminster know, almost for a fact, that there is no chance for winning a general election, and the voters aren't paying any attention to her.
16% in the polls.
16%, it's dire, but a worse stat is that only 5% of voters think she will be the next or think she could be the next Prime Minister or should be the next Prime Minister. So 5%, 1 in 20 people, and I think her total lack of leadership is only going to lead the Tories in one direction. What's worse for them is that the very, very likely outcome, if they do throw her overboard next year, which would be my prediction, is that Robert Jenrick replaces her. And that is a one-way ticket to them being absolutely annihilated at the next general election, because he is the tin pot, pound shop, Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I completely agree. I call him Nigel Farage light.
Yeah,
you know, like he's like the Pepsi version rather than, you know, it's like we don't got Coke but we got Pepsi. That's what Robert Jenrick is.
Virgin Cola version.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't like. Okay, so the thing with Kemi is, it's been less than a year since the general election. There is no way that she could go out there and start banging on about immigration and all this kind of stuff, because all the country is going to do is, well, wait a minute, you helped cause it. That is all that she can't do anything.
And this is the point that I made to John Cooper as well. In that I said, look, he says, oh, Labour can't keep banging on about 14 years. They can and they will, because they know, look, Labour aren't doing brilliantly. They're second in the polls.
Absolutely.
But they just keep saying this, and that's all they need to say.
Yeah, that's all they need to say. And the reason that they keep bringing up Liz Truss, for example, is the fact that the economy is actually starting to gain some traction back under Rishi. Let's look at where inflation was and let's look at where it is now. You know, they need to keep harking back. So as long as they keep doing that, Kemi will always be on the back foot. It's a good strategy for the Labour Party, but again, they can't not do it because they've got nothing else to really offer the country other than their own internal leadership battles, which I'm sure we'll get to. But my thing with Kemi is always the country look for competency now, and they look for delivering results, and they want to see a party that is together. And I don't think Reform offer that. The Labour Party certainly don't offer that. And I think just holding steady, hold the path, have some competent policies that come with costed, and what I would like to see some clear markers of saying, like, we achieved this, we achieved that. The Conservatives failed at the last general election because they couldn't point to anything in the last year and a half and go, we made that better, we made that better. They didn't have those markers of success.
A former chief of staff at Downing Street once said to me, the two things that the electorate need: they don't need to love you. No. They don't think you're wonderful and brilliant and marvellous. They just want to see competence and they want a bit of hope.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure Labour are giving either of those at the moment. Maybe you disagree, Andy?
I agree with half of that. What they're not doing is giving any kind of hope. It's all doom and gloom. I think a big mistake. I think the biggest mistake Labour has made, aside from the policy mistakes that have been made, but if you look at the way that they have communicated in their narrative, there's no sense of hope, but there's also no coherent narrative around what are we trying to achieve, what are we working towards.
Is there competence?
I think in some areas, yes, and in others, no. I think they're getting a grip on things. I think, actually, if you look at their delivery, they are starting to understand the scale of the challenge in front of them and recognise that they've got a massive majority and up to 4 years left. And if you look at certain areas like welfare, which I know we're going to come on to talk about, they're starting.
Well, let's talk about it now. I mean, there's a lot of problems with that. There are many people very annoyed. Angela Rayner is certainly one of them. She's cutting a very interesting figure this week in regard to some of the stuff that she's been saying behind the scenes, Andy.
Right. So she sent this memo to Rachel Reeves that outlined 8 potential tax rises that the Treasury should look at the budget in the autumn. Some of which are actually quite small and kind of sensible, but some of which are really, quite left-wing and I think be quite damaging if you look at things. So, for example, anything that amounts to a disincentive to save or invest and put into your pension, I think is a big mistake. We have a savings crisis in this country, and for those people who have been fortunate enough to save a significant amount of money, I don't see why we should sort of punish them and take that off them. So I think that's a big...
Quick line from Peter. We'll return to this properly a bit later on, but I just want a quick thought from Peter.
This is Angela Rayner trying to save her job. Let's not forget that there is a reshuffle in the background operating on this, and it is known within SW1 and within Westminster. This is a big dog reshuffle, so everybody's seat is up for grabs. She's failing in housing. She's failing
still going to be the deputy leader of the Labour Party, though.
She's still going to be deputy leader, but she might not be deputy prime minister, and her own brief is being ripped away from her because she's failing on housing. This is Angela Rayner securing herself with the left-wing swelling at the base, so she is unmovable. That's all this is. This is Angela Rayner yet again saving her own skin because of her own incompetence.
Well, I mean, she is immovable because she's an elected deputy leader.
As
she
deputy
has
leader
to be
of
in
the Labour Party,
yeah.
not within a cabinet minister. There's nothing to say that deputy leader has to be a cabinet secretary. There's nothing.
I think there is, actually. I'll double check that, but I think she has to be in the cabinet.
Okay, while Andy double checks that over the break, we will have a think. What do you think about this? 0344 499 1000. Lots to think about. And where do you see reform in all of this as well? There's lots to discuss. Andy and Peter will be with us again in just a second.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, lots of reaction to Ashley's call a little bit earlier, including from Diana Harding, who has tweeted to say, really feel sorry for your caller, Ashley. I can't imagine what it must be like to be Jewish these days, not helped by the legacy media like the BBC with their disgraceful coverage of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Did they ever apologise for allowing their platform to be used to start the ludicrous lie that 14,000 babies would die of starvation in 2 days? Thought not. Well, do you know what? It's not just the BBC. It was repeated 13 times in Parliament. That was a lie. That was untrue. But the problem was that when you have the United Nations relief chief, Tom Fletcher, saying that on a respected programme like Radio 4's Today programme, it's accepted as fact, and it was absolutely not a fact. And that is the problem. You know, a lie is halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. Thank you as well to Elle, who's been in touch, who says, who in the police are training the officers in your story? Utter madness. There's no way that a custody officer should charge the situation. Well, let's talk about that now, actually, because this is the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. It's yet another outrageous story of police overreach, and this is not just to do with Jewish people, although this particular story is. I spoke to Maxie Allen, the Times radio producer, works in this building, a few weeks ago, whose door was knocked. 6 police officers came to his door. He and his wife were held for 12 hours because they criticised the local school. There are so many examples of this, and now we have this example of a Jewish protester arrested by Metropolitan Police after he briefly held a placard satirising a Hezbollah terrorist leader. Now, you may not have thought that it was particularly in good taste to do this, but nonetheless, it wasn't illegal. The British man, who is asked to remain anonymous for his safety, was detained and charged last September over a cartoon that showed Hassan Nasrallah, the Lebanese terror chief, with a pager and the words beep, beep, beep. You remember the pager, the placard satirising the targeted Israeli attack. They supplied pagers, or they organised the supply of pagers to Hezbollah. Then they exploded. Many Hezbollah terrorists were either killed or injured by that. 42 people killed, mostly Hezbollah terrorists. Now, Nasrallah survived but was killed in an airstrike a week later. No tears for me in that one, I can happily say. During questioning, police repeatedly asked the man, who was part of a counter-demonstration against a pro-Palestinian march, if he believed the image would offend clearly pro-Hezbollah activists. Well, if you're out there supporting a terrorist organisation, I don't really care if you're offended. Peter Barnes, what do you think?
Well, is anybody surprised when the head of the Metropolitan Police said the word jihad needed context? And we had people with Nazi signs wandering down central London streets and nothing happened. This is the point. You know, London has become, and I think the UK as a whole has become a country more of, instead of asking, is it true? We ask, is it safe? And I think that is a really dangerous place for our society to be now, because Yes, you could be offended by this, but I'm not really bothered if you're offended by a Hezbollah of this image, because I don't support Hezbollah, and I don't understand why anybody should in this country.
It's a prescribed terrorist organisation. It is a prescribed terrorist organisation.
It's staggering to me that we have to have this conversation, but it doesn't come as a surprise when yet again we see people in authority, it's terrifyingly elected into positions, saying that, you know, we should care about if you're offended. I've said on this show many times, I don't care if you're offended. I genuinely don't.
Also, people who are supporting terrorists being offended. We can care. People may disagree with you and not want to be offended and think that people shouldn't be offended. But actually, if you're supporting terrorists, I mean, following the arrest, in the police interview, an officer can be seen repeatedly asking the counter-protester, do you think that showing this image to persons protesting, always speaking like a police officer, to persons protesting who are clearly pro-Hezbollah and anti-Israel, that by doing so would stir up racial hatred further than it is already? Both the counter-protester and his lawyer, Carl Wolf, who's a specialist criminal solicitor advocate, were completely shocked. In the footage, Mr. Wolf, the solicitor, replied, are you saying that there were pro-Hezbollah people there? Because it is a prescribed terrorist organisation. The officer answered, I'm aware of that, but continued the line of questioning. So the officer is aware that there are people supporting a pro-terrorist organisation, or being pro-Hezbollah, but chooses not to arrest them, chooses to arrest someone who is satirising the leader of a terrorist organisation. Andy?
No, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I thought Ashley's call was excellent, by the way. Look, I mean, my partner's Jewish, and so I'm kind of quite sensitive to some of these conversations. What I would say is that there seems to be a problem with the police. I think this is a policing issue, and I don't know enough about the inner workings of Metropolitan Police, but there clearly is something wrong in terms of a lack of understanding about how they should behave in these situations. So is it that we need to sort of a total reset and fresh guidance for police officers who are working at these sorts of protests to say exactly what you've just said, Peter, which is if somebody is there advocating for a terrorist organisation. And by the way, I don't go in for all of this two-tier nonsense, but what I would say is that
you don't think there's two-tier policing in this country?
Literally, this is presented to you on a platter as two-tier.
I don't think there's two-tier policing in the way that people try to claim two-tier policing is happening. But what I would say is that if somebody was out there arguing in favour of or championing Islamic State, let's say, or Al-Qaeda 20 years ago, I'm pretty sure they'd be arrested. So why is it, well, would they? I don't know. But
we had a guy walking down the street with a Hamas number 7 on the back of his shirt. That, and yet the Metropolitan Police couldn't find him in a city that has got more cameras than anywhere else in the world. Yet we have a guy with one placard showing a terrorist, you know, mocking that, and he was arrested. You cannot say that there is not two-tier policing in this country when that is what we've got. We also have a case of the police saying a gentleman who was, in their words, visibly Jewish, was not safe near the protest because he could have been injured. How can you say those protests are peaceful and that they are there representing, you know, a legitimate point of view when the Metropolitan Police, their own officers, said that they cannot guarantee a person's safety? These are hate marches. They should be stopped. And the head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, should resign with immediate effect because he is ultimately responsible for this, because he has got the fundamental principle of policing wrong. It is not his job to protect freedom of speech. It is his job to protect the King's peace.
Correct. Absolutely.
That is what the police have got entirely wrong here.
What I don't think there is, just to be clear, is an explicit policy of two-tier policing. So when you hear this term used, it's always two-tier Keir, the idea being that Keir Starmer is sitting in Downing Street and saying we should have two different levels of justice for different people and different groups. I do not think that's true. I think this is not conspiracy, this is cock-up, as always. I think it's an organisation in the Metropolitan Police that I can't use the phrase I was about to use, that doesn't know what it's doing. And I think there needs to be, whether it's Mark Rowley going or whether it's someone having a good talking to Mark Rowley and saying this is how you should be policing certain, you know, all groups on an equal basis, on a level playing field. But I think they're just in a mess and totally entangled. I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's an explicit policy.
The only person that could talk to Sir Mark Rowley is Sadiq Khan, and he's just as bad as the rest of them. You know, this guy is wandering around pretty much condoning a lot of this behaviour. So as far as I'm concerned,
I'm sure Sadiq Khan would deny that. But here's an example: a pro-Palestinian protester demonstrator filmed shouting, "I love the 7th of October" on the 20th of September, arrested by the Metropolitan Police under terrorism legislation, correctly.
Good.
He was not charged, despite Scotland Yard twice submitting a file of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service, the second time after appealing a decision not to pursue the case. So that's something the Metropolitan Police, I think, did correctly. The Crown Prosecution Service not doing their job correctly. A Met spokesman told The Telegraph that discussions with the CPS regarding the case were continuing, adding, "We will ensure all available avenues to challenge the decision not to bring the charges are pursued." I mean, this is the kind of reason it may be cock-up rather than conspiracy.
I think it is cock-up.
I think there's too many cock-ups for it to be considered conspiracy. When all the cock-ups trend in one direction, you've got to suddenly say that maybe there is a perceived bias at the very heart of the people making these It's not like there's one here and there's one there. They're all trending in one direction. That is not conspiracy. That is a group of people with a collective understanding about what is their job to do.
I think
that has to change.
I think you have an organisation. I think we're broadly on the same page here. I think you have an organisation that is not doing its job properly, that either doesn't understand how to police these situations, or is applying logic inconsistently or not applying logic at all. What I don't think there is, and I really, really believe this, there is not Keir Starmer sitting in Downing Street and saying, haha, these people will be lenient towards them, but these people, we're really going to punish them. I really do not think that's true. And I don't think I don't think Sadiq Khan is doing the same either. You can have your views about whether he's a good mayor of London, whether Keir Starmer's a good prime minister, but they are not, in my view, directing some sort of two-tier policing conspiracy.
No, I fundamentally disagree. There might not be it might not be on a big kind of master plan board kind of thing, but there is a sense by these people that there is a sense of privilege, and it's this concept that these people are privileged, these people aren't, and so therefore they must be treated differently. That is the sense. So it might not be a kind of they're doing it deliberately in terms of kind of policy specific thing, but when your starting point is not equal, then no matter what you do, your actions are dictated by that sense of unequalness, which isn't a word, but there we go. It's early. We'll give it time.
Keir Starmer's family is Jewish. I mean, you can't seriously
because
be saying
he's culturally anti-Semitic. That's the point. He comes from the same
Keir
kind
Starmer
of...
is
Do you think Keir Starmer's anti-Semitic?
I think he's culturally anti-Semitic, and he is uncomfortable defending the Jewish people because of his kind of background, the fact that he sits very comfortably in this kind of centre-left intelligentsia type that sits at the heart of the Labour Party that has a problem with Israel, and they use that as a mask because they have a problem with the Jewish faith. That is the reality.
He lives in North London, the most Jewish place in the country, with a Jewish woman who he married.
Anti-Semitic.
If you're culturally anti-Semitic, you don't marry a Jew.
I'm sure Keir Starmer would absolutely deny being in any way anti-Semitic, not that he's culturally anti-Semitic. Give us your perspective on this, Andy.
That is my... As I said, he lives in North London with a Jewish woman who he married with children who are being brought up as culturally Jewish. He is not culturally anti-Semitic. It's ridiculous.
I disagree, because his actions clearly tell you. Look at when Jeremy Corbyn was a girl. Where did he go when all the anti-Semitism
that's different.
Completely disappeared for political advantage.
Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic.
Well,
that's different.
Well, you have to explain to me, why is Diane Abbott still a member of the Labour Party? He was in charge. She said something that was absolutely horrific, and she was in. He just allowed it to happen. He allowed it to happen on his watch. That is, for me, a proof that he condones it. He might not be the one raging on the front lines like Jeremy Corbyn was, but he is he's in the background, operating in this environment where he is slightly condoning.
I'm not quite with Peter. I'm not quite with Peter. I want to be a little bit more charitable to Keir Starmer, who I'm sure would deny what Peter is saying. But what I think there's perhaps somewhere in the middle. Is it this idea that actually Keir Starmer needs to intervene but doesn't? And I do worry about many people and many leaders who, if there was the same level of hatred, of antagonism, of attacks and of criticism of any group, if it was black people, if it was gay people, if it was trans people, if it was any other minority, there are loads of people, and we all three of us know this, there are loads of people who wouldn't dream of using the N-word, of being horrible towards gay people, but for some reason Jewish people are fair game.
I think there's something in what you're saying, and leadership is taking a stand and intervening and taking action. And what I see with the Metropolitan Police is an organisation that's been failing for a long time on basically every level. You know, whether it's shoplifting, whether it's having your phone or your bike nicked, whether it's serving members of the Metropolitan Police raping and murdering women in London. All of these things. It is a failing organisation. They obviously took action a few years ago to try and intervene, but clearly on this issue around protests and around how we police these sorts of incidents, it's still not working.
I want to get a perspective from Mary in County Down, who's been in touch, and she says it's the big picture, what these repeated incidents of outrageous police bias against Jewish protesters and failure to arrest anti-Semitic pro-terror demonstrators say about the country. The UK has moved very rapidly from being a country where Jews were welcome, safe and valued as citizens to a hostile place for Jews. Why is that? Under Labour in particular, nothing will be done to turn the tide. Islamists and their useful idiots on the left know they have the upper hand now.
Yeah. It's 4 words, all forms of hatred. How often do we hear that at the end of sentences? Say anti-Semitism. It always has to, anything it's done with an attack on a Jewish person or any anti-Semitic incident is always, we oppose all forms of hatred. Sometimes we have to talk about specific things, but we never ever talk about anti-Semitism. It's never singled out as the one we have to focus on. It is always Islamophobia, the one that we have to focus on. All forms of hatred is the cover-all thing to say, look, we've got to say this, but we'd rather talk about Islamophobia because it is always the next step.
I agree with that, and I think the thing with anti-Semitism is it slips into people's everyday language much more easily. Look at the Gary Lineker tweet, for example, and I don't think he is an anti-Semite. I think he's an idiot who wasn't paying attention to the thing he was. Well, I don't think he is. I don't know him, but I think he wasn't paying due attention to, no pun intended, to the thing that he was reposting, where he would have done if it was about Muslims. Or another group.
And do you know what? We do talk about it on this station, and sometimes the clips of what we talk about go on YouTube, and sometimes the kind of interviews that I did, including with that lawyer Frank McGuinness, you may remember, the one who was saying that Hamas shouldn't be a prescribed organisation anymore. He was putting that legal action forward anyway, not a case just yet. And sometimes people see those who are not necessarily friendly. And I was coming out of a tube station in London yesterday, and a man started shouting and remonstrating with me and being very unpleasant about that, and asking me things like, how do you sleep at night? Don't you care about Palestinian children being murdered? The answer is, yes, I do, of course. It was an unpleasant experience, but it was about 1% of what many, many people in this country, including Jewish people, actually experience. I rang a good friend as a direct result of that. I rang her immediately afterwards. She sort of calmed me down. But it just shows, I think, that there is a huge level of emotion about this. And when, you know, the man came up to me and was deeply unpleasant, but also, you know, I walked away and held my dignity, and I was happy with how I dealt with it. But we need to find a way to have a reasonable conversation. If he had approached me, as some people sometimes do, and had a reasonable conversation and say, I totally disagree with you. There's a controversy about 6 months ago that was on this station. I'm not going to rehearse it, but someone came up to me in a pub and said, I totally disagree with you on your views on this particular issue. We had a very reasonable conversation. We need to find a way to disagree without being disagreeable.
It's because we've got to elevate the truth. That's the thing, we've got to elevate and start calling out people who don't say things that are true. Look at this incident with all these 14,000 dead babies situation. That was, like you said, the lie
factually
is already
wrong.
factually incorrect. Wrong. We cannot have an honest conversation if the facts that we're going off aren't true. And it's up to people to call out bad actors.
Totally agree with that. And what makes that situation even worse is that social media allows people, you said, you know, a lie gets halfway around the world. Social media allows falsehoods to spread so quickly, and that is
loads
a
of people,
real problem.
when things are wrong and they've retweeted things or sent them, they don't delete it, they don't say sorry. No. You know, there are lots of these MPs, 13 of them, 13 parliamentarians who repeated that.
There's also, though, a lack of
We need to go to a break, but
just a lack of accountability for those within institutions who are repeating these lies.
Yeah.
They're never held accountable for it. This was wrong, what you said was wrong, and you should not just apologise, but maybe we should start firing people that say things that are incorrect.
I think we should ask people at least to retract them. We'll be back in the debate desk in just a second with Peter and Andy. Stay with us here on Talk.
at so many different levels, with the EU, with the Chagos deal, with mass immigration. This country has been opened up and been essentially violated by successive governments. And when you see people, accusing people of gravitating towards the right, voting reform, the government is effectively radicalising the British people. And if there wasn't a party like Reform for that outlet of resentment and rage and anger to be put into a democratic, peaceful avenue, if that wasn't there, I really worry about the state of affairs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you, everybody who has been in touch. Your two guests this morning remind me of my primary school woodwork classes. Lots of thick, short planks.
That's good stuff.
Israel is doing a good job of protecting us against terrorism, says Robert. Mr. G says the reason we have left-wing police bias is a requirement for all officers to go to university. This wouldn't have happened if we were employing ex-military personnel to become officers without university, says Grant in Aldershot. There are some people who get through university and aren't left-wing by the end of it.
Not many of them.
Also, do you have to be right-wing to be in the military? I mean, I guess it helps, but I didn't realise.
Not always the case.
No,
so is it illegal to condemn a terrorist organisation but okay to wave banners and shout anti-Jewish slogans and threats? I would like to see all terrorists executed, says Sue. So should I be arrested? And Stuart says, just leave that one hanging there. Stuart says, a policeman must have said, I'm arresting you because people who support terrorists may be offended. What are the police thinking by not sacking that policeman? Isn't that the job of the police to fight against terrorists? Yes, absolutely. And Jason in the Lake District says it doesn't matter who's leading the Tories. 14 years of broken promises and failure are not to be forgotten or forgiven in the short term. It's a poisoned chalice with reform being so dominant. Well, just in the last couple of minutes, literally a minute each if you don't mind, let's talk about a little bit more about Angela Rayner. Rayner on the rampage after pressing Reeves to hike taxes. She clashes with the Chancellor and Starmer on cuts as supporters eye up her leadership chances. Clearly an awful lot around, including PIP and welfare, and we've spoken to various MPs who are saying that they're thinking of voting against the government on that. Could we see a climb down? Where do you see this going, Andy?
So I think that there will be a pretty significant rebellion on the left wing of the Labour Party against these cuts. That's not surprising. It's the usual suspects. I think Labour has a massive opportunity to radically overhaul the welfare system in this country. Fraser Nelson has done some amazing work on this, and I'd encourage anyone listening to read up. But I mean, in short, in Birmingham...
Excellent documentary on Channel 4.
Very good documentary. Yep. In Birmingham, a quarter of people are on out-of-work benefits. In Manchester, it's 20%. In Grimsby, it's 55%. There are 800,000 more people on long-term sick now than there were at the start of the pandemic. That cannot be the case, and we have to get a grip on it. And I think yes, there'll be a rebellion, but Starmer and Reeves need not to climb down as they did on winter fuel. They need to see it through and recognise they've got a massive majority and a big opportunity.
Peter, briefly.
Yeah, for me, this is Angela Rayner trying to save her job. This is also what happens when you elect in a government that does not have a plan, and they're jumping from issue to issue to issue. They're trying to hold it all together, and unfortunately, this is what happens also when Keir Starmer wants into each individual bit of the Labour Party, starts promising the world, gets into power, and starts kind of reneging on those promises. Just as he lied to get into number 10, he lied to become leader of the Labour Party, and this is the consequence of what happens. And yet again, it is the country that suffers.
We need to set a really clear direction and identify a handful of priorities, 4 years, and see them through. And if the left, but that's the thing. Just pick a handful.
A million missions
exactly. Just pick 3 things that you're going to really nail over the next few years, and trust me, the electorate will reward you. But that's what I totally agree. You know, it's just piecemeal. It's trying to appeal to this and that. this government has a huge majority. Have the courage of your convictions, back yourself, see it through.
Thank you both very much indeed, Andy Williams and Peter Barnes. Great to hear from them both. What do you think about what they've said? 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk to Jonathan Sacerdoti, the journalist and broadcaster, about that Jewish protester charged over a placard mocking a terrorist leader. Where is free speech in this country? Where is the rule of law in this country? Huge implications. Let me know what you think as well. Plenty to discuss here on Talk.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino?
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. Is an Aussie that has been dive bombed by our version of the Magpie, which is much bigger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. Thank you so much for your company. Loads to talk about, including the Jewish protester charged over a placard mocking a terrorist leader. He was asked whether he was worried about offending people who supported terrorism. The Metropolitan Police arrested him. He has been held over him for 8 months before they decided to drop the charges. There's a lot in this story. We're going to go through it with Jonathan Sacerdoti, the journalist and broadcaster, in just a second. Later, we're going to talk about ME Awareness and Reform campaign. Sean O'Neill, who's a senior writer at The Times, he's the journalist I want to be when I grow up. He has won a press award for Campaign of the Year 2025. It's about his daughter. His daughter had ME. She died because there wasn't enough care for her. Care in this country, big topic, big debate to be had. Let us know your thoughts on that as well. We'll talk about mental health A&Es as well. They're to be opened across England. We'll also speak about modern zoo practice. The managing director of the Big Cat Sanctuary and star of CBBC's One Zoo 3 is going to talk about zoos. Are they misunderstood as places of entertainment? But now standards apparently are unmistakably clear. What do you think about that? Loads to discuss, including what Peter Barnes and Andy Williams were discussing just a second to go. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Get your voice on the air. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please, 0344 499 1000. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring on that number. One more time, 0344 499 1000. Plenty to talk about between now and 1 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Rob's not too happy about Andy and Peter. He says, Peter, please don't have those two idiotic guests on again. They're so depressing and negative, says Rob. Okay, we'll have to think about that, but I like them both, actually. Lots of people in touch about the issue, what we're going to talk about in just a second, with Jonathan Sackerduty about the Jewish protester charged over a placard mocking a terrorist leader. It's an astonishing story. Who in the police are training these officers, says Elle. Utter madness. There's no way that a custody officer should charge in this situation. Seeing the growth of anti-Semitism in the UK, I've had serious discussions this morning about leaving. I don't look obviously Jewish or live in a Jewish area, but knowing my people are being discriminated in this way makes me want to leave. It's the 1930s again. This is awful. Angela says, I agree with Peter Barnes regarding the police and the blatant two-tier policing. As for London, it's like a third world city now, unsafe and dirty. Furthermore, if you can't trust the police to be fair to all, it's dangerous for so many people. Another Jewish person has been in touch saying, my Jewish nephew is a Corbynista. Being Jewish doesn't preclude you from being an anti-Semite, I'm ashamed to say. She also says, I want to hug Peter Barnes. The all forms of hatred bit really riles me. Yes, we get that a lot. Sadiq Khan has put that in various press releases saying all forms of hatred must be targeted. Yeah, we know that, but why can't you just talk about anti-Semitism and say anti-Semitism is wrong? Angela's been in touch and said, I'm so sorry you were verbally attacked yesterday, Peter. Pleased you were able to phone a friend to help. I am too, and thank you, Angela. I'm absolutely fine. There was no major issue. It was just an unpleasant thing that happened on my way home. This guy just started shouting at me about being, defending Israel and, don't you care about this, that and the other. It was just, go and get a proper job. And he started talking about, well, I'll not say the words he used, but horrible language in regard to this station as well. Thank you to this person who says, what is so rarely mentioned when discussing anti-Semitism is that Muslims in the UK outnumber Jews by about 15 to 1, making them not only more electively important, but also strengthen numbers in attacking supporters of Israel, aided by the left and the media. Lots to discuss in all of this. I'm not saying for a second that all Muslims are anti-Semitic. Of course they're not, but many of them are, I'm afraid. Many people are anti-Semitic of all faiths, and none. Francis and Devon says, Peter and Andy are two of my favourite commentators, and with Andy on board, they're a team that makes me feel that there's still hope for my beloved country. This channel is a breath of fresh air. Francis, thank you, appreciate that. What I don't appreciate and what I'm really, really worried about is the Jewish protester who was charged over a placard mocking a terrorist leader. This is a Jewish protester arrested by the Metropolitan Police, the largest police force in this country, after he briefly held a placard satirising a Hezbollah terrorist leader. The British man was detained and charged last September over a cartoon that showed Hassan Nasrallah, the Lebanese terror chief, with a pager and the words beep, beep, beep. Now, the placard satirising a targeted Israeli attack dubbed Operation Grim Beeper, in which explosives in pagers and walkie-talkies killed 42 people, mostly Hezbollah terrorists. Nasrallah survived, but was killed in an airstrike a week later than that. During questioning, police repeatedly asked the man, who was part of a counter-demonstration against a pro-Palestinian march, if he believed the image would offend clearly pro-Hezbollah and anti-Israel activists. Why does that matter? What does it matter if you offend people who are defending terrorism? Well, Jonathan Sackerduty is a journalist and broadcaster and has a great Twitter thread on this that I read this morning. A number of people sent me the story and it's on the front page of the Telegraph. Jonathan, where do you want to start with this? There's so much to it.
Where to start? The police have completely lost the plot. I don't understand why we keep seeing story after story of ridiculous police activity like this. We're told that they don't have enough resources to police properly, and then we read the stories about multiple police and police vans turning up at the home of a man who held up a sign that they said could offend people who are pro-Hezbollah. Hezbollah being a proscribed terrorist organisation, and it comes hot on the heels of that story about Julian Fawkes, the 71-year-old retired special constable from Kent, who around the same time was arrested by 6 officers from Kent Police over a tweet he posted, which warned about the rise of anti-Semitism in the country. They arrested him for that and went through all his belongings, just as in this case. We hear that in that case they found copies of The Spectator magazine that I write for, said it was a bit Brexity. That's apparently a crime too now. Of course, there's the famous case of Lucy Connolly, that 42-year-old former childminder who tweeted something, arrested, put in jail for 30 months, even on appeal, not dropped. She removed that tweet after about 4 hours. All of these stories point to the same thing, which is that this isn't policy, as far as I'm concerned. In my opinion, this pattern makes it very clear that the police are no longer trying to police crimes, because these some of these cases, as in the one today with Hassan Nasrallah in that satirical placard, obviously get dropped by the CPS. No, they're doing something quite different. At best, they're trying to maintain some sort of community harmony, and at worst, well, it's something far more sinister. And I'll say that if it's maintaining community harmony, this is a complete inversion of what the police are meant to do, because if there are communities in our society that will only remain harmonious if they can support terrorism and nobody challenges that in public, then the police are no longer doing their job. They're not arresting the people that support terrorism, which is a crime.
Another example was, of course, the pro-Palestinian protester who held up a placard with Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman portrayed as coconuts. Now, that is a very straightforward racist trope that essentially says that they may have skin that is not white, they may have brown skin outwardly, but inwardly they are white, and that they are traitors in that way. She wasn't charged. That wall was dropped. And people ask, is there two-tier policing in this country? It's so straightforward.
Well, actually, maybe it will surprise you and some of your listeners and viewers. I actually don't think she should have been arrested either. It was clearly a satirical placard that she held up. I think it was an obnoxious and racist one, but it wasn't, for example, supporting terrorism overtly. And the two-tier policing, in my opinion, is when they arrest people like her even, who I perhaps don't have very much agreement with, and the person that we've read about today, but they don't arrest people on the streets for calling for jihad, or people flying the black Shahada flag, which is very commonly accepted to be a terrorist symbol showing affiliation to ISIS and groups like that. I know that because I've reported those things myself, and there's been no response from the police. So that's the two-tier policing as far as I see it. When you have people being put in prison for tweets, which may have been offensive, but weren't necessarily criminal. I mean, I think the Lucy Connolly one said that, you know, people could burn down the hotels as far as she's concerned. The idea that that was incitement, to my mind, seems ridiculous, though she pleaded guilty, so I suppose she was badly advised by her lawyers. My point is not about the particulars of each individual case. As I said, it's about a trend. It's about a pattern.
And actually, about a month ago, I interviewed Maxie Allen, who's a colleague, actually, works in Times Radio, which is in this building as well. He was arrested, held for 12 hours, as was his partner, because they had criticised a school. 6 officers came to their home. You know, the Times had seen every single message they sent. A few of them were a little bit spicy. They weren't even nearly as strong as Lucy Connolly or any of those other messages. I just want to play a little bit of the interview. This is from The Telegraph. The Telegraph has this story today, and I just want to play a little bit of this interview with this man. Some of it's blurred, and what the police said to him in regard to the placard that he was holding, which was satirising the pager attacks. Let's see a little bit of this and then get Jonathan's reaction.
Anti-Israel, that by doing so would stir up racial hatred further than it is already.
Are you saying that there were people there who were pro-Hezbollah?
That's what I'm asking. Were there? Is that image?
Well, you've suggested that there were, by your question, that there were people who were pro-Hezbollah. So are you saying that there were pro-Hezbollah people there because it's a prescribed terrorist organisation?
Well, the police officer said, I'm aware of that, and not in that clip, but did say, I'm aware of that. So let's just let that sink in for a second. They knew that there were pro-Hezbollah people there. They knew on that march there were people glorifying Hezbollah, Jonathan, yet they decided to do nothing about that, the Metropolitan Police, and decided to arrest this guy.
Yeah, I mean, Hezbollah was fully prescribed as a terrorist organisation by the UK on the 25th of February 2019. So the police have had plenty of time to understand what they should in order to do their job. And it's important as well, perhaps, that people who don't know what Hezbollah is have an appreciation. It is especially close to Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the terror state that has created this network of proxies around Israel and around the world which carry out acts of terrorism. And I think it's important to remember also that, you know, they were close to Syria under its previous leadership to Assad, even fighting with Syria. Hezbollah is not some cuddly, fluffy thing that you should be able to go out onto the streets of London and support. And yet we have in that interview a guy who's literally gone out with a placard, a satirical placard at that, which is mocking this terrorist organisation's leader. And they're saying that this could be offensive to people who support Hezbollah. And they're asking that of him and his lawyer as if he should be ashamed of upsetting people that support that terrorist organisation. I would say that all decent people should be supportive of upsetting those who support that terrorist organisation. But far more importantly, the police ought to be arresting those people. If they thought that he was upsetting someone on that protest who supported Hezbollah, that means they thought there were people there who supported Hezbollah. That means they should have arrested those people, and instead they arrested the Jew. So these people have got it all the wrong way round, and the police are really creating a terrible image for themselves. The government is doing worse because it's not correcting this problem. I think that we are now living in a country where, you know, we've had the US president and vice president commenting on the lack of freedom of speech in this country. We've had protests about two-tier policing. We see all sorts of things going on, and we're not stupid. We know what's happening here. I think that it's time that this really got dealt with properly. The police need to deal with things properly, but all we see from government interventions are things like Keir Starmer deciding that there should be people arrested, charged and imprisoned within 24 or 48 hours only for certain types of thought crime that he didn't like, and not for anything that actually offends the right-thinking people of this country, anything that is anti-Semitic, not for the hate crimes, not for the people calling for jihad, not for the people attacking the only Jewish state in the world, Israel, for daring to defend itself against exterminationist jihadi fighters. All of this is so upside down, and it's not just Jews who are upset about it or who are suffering from it. It's right-thinking, sensible, British, patriotic people who want to stand up for liberal values, freedoms that we now, unfortunately, have to fight for.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Well put. Jonathan Sacardoli, broadcaster and journalist there. Lots to discuss, lots to unpack within what he's saying there. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk.
so many different levels with the EU, with the Chagos deal, with mass immigration. This country has been opened up and been essentially violated by successive governments. And when you see people, accusing people of gravitating towards the right, voting reform, the government is effectively radicalising the British people. And if there wasn't a party like Reform for that outlet of resentment and rage and anger to be put into a democratic, peaceful avenue, if that wasn't there, I really worry about the state of affairs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is
Thanks to Wayne Reid, who has contacted me on Twitter to say, your guest Andy has it wrong on labour welfare cuts. By all means, look at the work shy. But PIP is not the benefit they should be touching. It is not means tested, and it shouldn't be. The most difficult to be awarded and an awfully demeaning process. PIP fraud is unlikely. Another person says, we only have to look at Hugh Edwards to see that we have two-tier justice in this country. The left Wafa and their Islamist friends and comrades are a protected species. It is not what you say or do, but who you say or do it against that determines the punishment. It's a very worrying thing, and I think, unfortunately, it is true in many respects. This person says, Cardi P, why did you let Andy Toxic Williams get away with what he said about Kemi? Would you invent her? He said if she didn't exist, you wouldn't invent her. This is absolutely disgusting. He should apologise. Listen, that's a harsh criticism. Certainly, politicians are big people. We're this home of free speech, and listen, it's not necessarily a nice thing, but it's nonetheless fair comment, I think, and I didn't challenge him on it because I thought it's a feeling a lot of people have, including quite a few Conservatives, maybe not in those terms, but certainly Kemi Badenoch's record is something that should be questioned. Marjorie says, I'm glad you're discussing ME, Peter. I first had this in 1974. No or extremely few doctors knew this illness existed then, and so when I visited a GP for help, I was repeatedly insulted and once physically abused. It was more than a decade until I was finally diagnosed, and during that period, my life was hell. Marjorie, I'm so sorry to hear that you went through that, and let me tell you, our discussion on ME is coming very, very soon with Sean O'Neill, who's been an indefatigable campaigner on this. So Sean is coming up very, very soon. Elsa has been in touch. She says, good morning, Peter. Andy Williams is deluded if he thinks Labour could be re-elected. If they deal with 2 or 3 problems, hardcore leftists will vote for them no matter what, but the vast majority won't forgive or forget the nightmare of their first year. I've never known a politician as hated and despised as Starmer. The same goes for the rest of the cabinet. In what world does he think anything they do or say will change how they feel? I think the Tories under Jenrick have more chance of turning things around, and that's not all likely. Plenty of anger there from Elsa. Maybe what else you should do is let it go. Little Frozen reference there for you. Rich in London says, morning Peter, I'm horrified and appalled at the Metropolitan Police arresting of a Jewish protester. He was calling out a vile terrorist group and was arrested for a hate crime. What on earth is going on in our country? This is madness, and it promotes more Jewish hate, says Rich in London. Well, thank you for that. Nigel, also in London, has given us a ring, 0344 499 1000. We've been talking a lot about politics this morning, about Kemi Badenoch, about reform, about Angela Rayner and her position within the Labour Party as well. What's your take on the politics of the day, Nigel?
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me onto your wonderful, illuminating show.
Thank you.
I wanted to say, I mentioned about Nigel Farage, about Kemi Badenoch. I think that Nigel Farage, charismatic as he may be, will never be a standalone Prime Minister with the Reform Party in government.
You don't think so?
No, because I think, let's look at this from a logical point of view. They have 5 seats. Mm-hmm. How are you suddenly going to get hundreds more seats and become a controlling power, or controlling party, I believe? I think that he would be with the Tories a coalition, but I can never see Reform actually going into government on their own. I think it's impossible. It would be like the Messiah coming back to suddenly get the amount of seats that party would need to have a control in government, I think, is impossible.
Although if you look at their ratings in the polling at the moment, if you look at how well they've done in the council elections, I have often said, and a lot of people don't like me saying it, but I think the most likely thing after the next election, because of the system we have, not because of any support or lack of support for Reform UK, I think the most likely thing is a Labour-Lib Dem coalition.
Well, that's possible. I mean, we mustn't write the Lib Dems because they do quite well, don't they? They've risen quite a lot.
Yeah.
I think Kemi Badenoch is, I can only say, as far as I'm concerned, she's completely lacklustre. She has a wonderful position every Wednesday to really demolish Keir Starmer at PMQs, but she misses the beat every single time.
Do you not think she did relatively well this week, Nigel? No?
No, I think about 2 weeks ago she had a good pop at Starmer. But, you know, let's face it, what's happening to this country at the moment, it's slowly imploding with what's going on. And I think that she, in her position, isn't strong enough. I mean, I'm very... You know, Robert Jenrick, unfortunately, I think would be good, but I don't think he'd be good enough as James Cleverly, who's got a much wider experience in politics, of course, an ex-military man. And I think for him, he would have been the ideal choice. But as you know, in your position, it's not decided by the Conservative Party. It's decided by...
They've got to get to the final two, don't they? Yeah.
And that's a difficulty. Is trying to sort of sway the old Blue Rinse Brigade. And I think that in reality, it's going to be very, very difficult. And I think also there's going to be a leadership challenge, I think, against Starmer.
Interesting. Okay.
By either Rayner or Wes Streeting.
Okay. Interesting. Why do you think that?
Well, look, I think Wes Streeting, from what I read and from what I see and from what I hear on the streets, is gathering momentum and gathering support.
I think I agree with you in that he's very strong and he's got he's a great communicator, although sometimes he doesn't quite get it right. He certainly has a lot of support. But would he actually challenge Keir Starmer, and wouldn't it go back to what Michael Heseltine said when he said he who wields the knife seldom wears the crown?
Well, Peter, you and I are in the same business, and politics is an ugly, ugly, horrible pit to be in. And I think in reality, if someone can seize an opportunity and see their future as stronger than someone else's future, they will wound the leader and challenge them. And I don't think there's much happiness on the front bench. You've got discord between Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner. I don't think it's such a rosy relationship between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. She's failed on so many fronts. And I think that will be the undoing. And of course, we've got Ed Miliband, another complete failure.
Yeah. Lots to chew over in that. Very, very interesting call. Thank you, Nigel. And you're right. I mean, politics is a very ugly business. Lots of backstabbing, lots of egos, lots of agendas, and people dealing with each other in sometimes really dreadful ways. So that's why I went to journalism for a break from all of that. John's in Dorset and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. John, you're very welcome to the programme.
Good morning, Peter. At the risk of rehashing an old theme, if the Conservatives were a football team, they would still be a poison chalice. And Kemi Badenoch, for all of her capabilities, inherited a poison chalice. Mm-hmm. And how they perform at Prime Minister's questions is really irrelevant. It's only theatre. It just, maybe Jenrick is a slightly better performer. I mean, he's been on the Ozempic, cleaned up the image. But what's the point? I mean, Labour trivialise any debate. Starmer sits there with his vacuous, like a Yabu sucks, like a sixth form debating society, when he's just made a totally irrelevant point against the opposition. I mean, he is a nothing man. He's a vacuous coward. He doesn't even lead his own party. He's there hoping that perhaps he will hang on to the job. Well, ultimately, I was a Conservative for 54 years, and I saw the Conservative Party liberalised under Cameron, then Johnson, and then eventually I heard myself described as the right wing of the party. There is no right wing of the Conservative Party anymore because we've all joined Reform.
Is there any way the Conservatives could get you back, John, or is that it? Is it just over?
The Conservative Party I joined 54 years ago, I was attracted to Margaret Thatcher. She was clear on her policies. She wanted a smaller state. people would be more self-reliant. We have a society that's become so dependent on the state, and obviously the state loves that, especially if they're the lefties, because you've got to give the people what they want. Yeah. They paid off the doctors and the nurses, and they're talking about striking again. This is a totally ineffective government.
John, I think a lot of people agree with what you're saying, and when the Conservatives can't actually get through and cut through when the government is on the ropes, well, people will look elsewhere, and they're looking like you have to reform. Thank you for your thoughts there, John. That's John in Dorset there. Add to those. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. In just a second, we're going to talk to Sean O'Neill, who's a senior writer on The Times. He has just won a press award, a very significant award for the campaign of the year. And this is in regard to ME, but the reason that he has been campaigning on it for so long is the tragic story of his daughter. We're going to hear this in just a second. You're going to want to hear this. Sean is a remarkable man. He's kind of the journalist I want to be when I grow up, to be honest. And he has just been an indefatigable campaigner on this, and he's made many strides forward for people with ME, and the whole issue of care, how we care for people, how we deal with people who are in serious need, is a big one that we discuss on many occasions on this station and on this programme, and we will make sure that we discuss that more from Sean's angle and talk about what he has been campaigning about. It's going to be a really interesting interview. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Sean O'Neill is a senior writer at The Times and joins me now. He's won a press award this week for the campaign of the year. The reason he's won the award is his brilliant journalism, but what has inspired that is, very sadly, in this instance anyway, the death of his daughter, who had ME, a much misunderstood condition. I want to understand it a bit better now, and I want to understand how we deal with people who have ME in this country, because if you look at what the coroner was told at Maeve Boothby O'Neill, his daughter, in Maeve's inquest in October last year, the coroner said there was no current available funding for research into and treatment for the chronic fatigue syndrome, and said there was extremely limited training for doctors treating patients. The coroner heard there was not a single NHS or private bed in England set aside specifically for the treatment of a patient with severe ME. That's disgraceful. Sean joins me now. Sean, good morning and congratulations on your award.
Morning, Peter. Thank you.
Tell me what inspired your writing. Tell me about the journey that Maeve went through, because this is something that she lived with for more than half her life.
Yeah. may have developed a viral infection when she was about 12 or 13. Hard to sort of remember exactly when it was, but she had complications ever since. Initially, it was mostly fatigue and dizziness and things like that. And I distinctly remember one day picking her up from school. She'd been fainted while out cross-country running, and that was the first kind of alarm bell for her family that something wasn't quite right. And we were told at the time by doctors that, oh, young girls get this kind of blood pressure, low blood pressure, fainting, etc., etc. With Maeve, it never really recovered. She battled on until she passed through. She got her A-levels. She did really well in her A-levels, but she didn't feel well enough to go to university. And really, she was at home, and her health was declining since then. And the last couple of years of her life, last 2 or 3 years, she was completely housebound, then bedbound. She lived with her mum down in Devon. I lived in London. It became difficult to even see her because seeing people was exhausting. She became more and more isolated. But she had spirit, you know. She would write funny emails and funny texts, and she had her life force still. I think her mind never declined. She was really sharp. She was really knowledgeable about her condition. And she fought it as best she could until the last 6 or 7 months of her life. She just became horribly, horribly ill. Was in and out of hospital 3 times. The hospital basically admitted they couldn't do anything for her. They didn't have any training. They didn't have any expertise. They didn't have any treatments. Which, when you think of ME as a disease or post-viral condition that affects hundreds of thousands of people in this country, and there is no specialist services across the country for them, and as far as I can see, there won't be any. So
why not, Sean? Why do they not exist, and why won't there be? This is clearly a huge problem, and surely the health service should do something about it.
That seems the obvious thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think that it's hard to get to the bottom of this. There is a deep cultural resistance in the medical profession to believing that ME is a physical illness. There's increasing small but quite significant research pointing towards proving the belief that most patients have that this is post-viral. You know, that something happens. More and more doctors do accept that something happens in the body of ME sufferers. Something happens in the wake of a viral illness, such as COVID, for example, or flu, or Epstein-Barr, or there are many viruses. That the body changes somehow. The body doesn't recover in the way that most of us recover, and people have these prolonged spells of fatigue. For some people, it can be a fluctuating illness. For some, not. But there's a deep-rooted body of opinion within the medical profession, especially in psychiatry, that this is a mental illness. But somehow it's all in the mind, that these patients are, what they need to do is pull their socks up, do exercise programs, and they'll get better. They'll shake it off. A bit of CBT and a bit of exercise therapy, and you'll get better. That belief persists. It's really deep. I mean, one of the doctors, a couple of doctors who treated Maeve in hospital were, in my opinion, were of that view, but daren't say it. They said that they didn't know. And we had other doctors. I mean, there was one guy who admitted her and sent her home the same day, even though he said she's really weak and really ill. He sent her home because he had absolutely no training in a condition that he admitted in the inquest was quite common. He saw quite a lot of. And it's almost staggering that there's no...
It is staggering.
There's an online training program, a sort of module you can take. That's it. It's not good enough.
So what have you been campaigning for? Tell us about your campaign. Tell us about what you've been writing about and telling people through the Times.
I think, to be honest, Peter, I didn't see this as a campaign at first. I saw it as, so Maeve died, it's almost 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years in October. But she died in October 2021. And we had a 3-year wait for an inquest, and the inquest process was supposed to be, I thought, where we'll get some answers and some explanations. I'm not sure we ever got any answers, but it almost felt that the only way I could get through this process, because you wait 3 years, you're grieving, the grieving process is kind of halted, frozen, and then you have to relive that death again, dissected by lawyers, 6,600 pages of documents to wade through, no legal support for us as a family, but the hospital, the GP surgery, the local social services all had lawyers paid for out of the public purse. I mean, that's another scandal in itself. But I felt the only way I could do this as a journalist was to make it a public issue. I didn't really want to make Maeve a public figure, but I felt that there was something to be said and done, that the court of public opinion around how we deal with people with ME, how we treat people with ME, that court was more important than the coroner's court.
Yeah.
So I'd set out to raise awareness rather than to campaign, I think.
And Sean, you yourself, of course, were dealing with some of the biggest stories in the UK around the time that Maeve was suffering through these many years. You're a very, very senior, decorated reporter doing so many different big stories. What was it like for you to deal with sometimes the emotional toil of those stories, whilst at the same time thinking about your daughter going through this illness that so few medical professionals understood or treated properly?
Like anything, you know yourself, Peter, you have to kind of compartmentalize things. And that's, you know, there were times when Maeve wanted to talk about this publicly, and there were times when she didn't, and I had to respect her wishes with it. And you know, stories, I have that sort of mental ability to put them in a box and deal with them and try and complete them and finish them. This, on the other hand, was completely different. This was dragging myself into the middle of a story and a publicity issue, and it was incredibly difficult. And I think, you know, to win the award for Campaign of the Year at the Press Awards was, I think, recognition not just of people with ME, but I think of the Times as a newspaper. I mean, the support that the editor and my colleagues gave me was exceptional. And the weight of the Times as a brand, as a newspaper reporting on this was incredibly important in influencing what government and what the coroner said, and eliciting promises from ministers, promises which have yet to be acted on, I might add. But it was, like I said, it was a way of me dealing with it. But at the end of it, I mean, it's almost now, I'll be dead honest with you, talking to you now about it, it's a bit like putting my hand back in the fire again. I think on a personal level, unlike any other story, I need to draw a line and stop, you know. And I had very much in my mind my colleague and friend Andrew Norfolk, who died recently, and what the emotional toll stories can take on him. Andrew got highly personally involved in stories, and
he exposed grooming gangs and did an incredible work on that. He died recently.
Yeah, but it took a big emotional toll on him, I know personally.
Yeah. What do you want to happen now? You talked about some of those promises that have been made to you and haven't been acted on so far. What should happen? What are the first steps in getting some sort of change?
I think government has been promising a delivery plan on ME for 3 or 4 years now. That plan is it's been delayed again. It's due to be published by the end of June. I would like to actually see some concrete steps in that. What I would love, I think, would be a specialist unit somewhere in the NHS that people with severe ME like Maeve had could be treated compassionately and with their special needs addressed, because, you know, hospitals are like factories. They're noisy, busy places, and it's very, very difficult for somebody who's as ill as Maeve to even be in a hospital, frankly. But I think compassion, specialist care, above all, money for research. There's an illness here that I was at an event recently where scientists were talking about, we think we're at a tipping point. We're coming to understand more what it is, but we need more investment in research. And it's not a huge amount that's needed, you know, with our AI technologies, with DNA information. A lot can be achieved for a little money, I think, in this field. But I know that at the moment there is no commitment from anyone in government to put any additional money into cracking ME.
We've talked a lot about Maeve, her suffering, and very sadly her death. How will you remember her? The illness, of course, a big part of her life, but there's so much more. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little about her as a person.
She was, God, I have to turn to the years before she was really ill, you know, but she was sparky, she was feisty, she was an incredible devourer of books, and she was, you know, a funny, really funny, bright girl. And I suppose I try and remember things like taking her swimming and her drama shows and her bike riding and little simple childhood things that you know, I think with time passes, grief turns to you try and remember the happy things as best you can. And that's what I try and do now. I try to separate the ME stuff and whatever campaigning I do on that from the person that I have to remember, and I have to, you know, remember as fondly as possible, try not to dwell on her last months and days.
Sean, thank you for speaking to me today. I really appreciate it, and you're a great human being as well as a brilliant reporter and campaigner, so thank you for speaking to me today. Sean O'Neill, senior writer at The Times there and winner of the Press Award for Campaign of the Year, and rightly so, remembering his daughter Maeve Boothby O'Neill. Right then, thank you for everybody who's been in touch. Lots and lots of different aspects of what we're talking about today. We'll get to that in just a second. We'll also talk about mental health A&E. Is that something that could mean separating physical and mental health patients in hospitals and A&E? Is that a good idea? That's something the government is proposing. We'll get some analysis of that in just a second here on Talk.
At so many different levels, with the EU, with the Chagos deal, with mass immigration, this country has been opened up and been essentially violated by successive governments. And when you see people, you know, accusing people of gravitating towards the right, voting reform, the government is effectively radicalising the British people. And if there wasn't a party like Reform for that outlet of resentment and rage and anger to be put into a democratic, peaceful avenue, if that wasn't there, I really worry about the state of affairs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Leslie, who's been in touch about that interview and said it's very hard to receive a diagnosis for ME. There's an excellent book titled Living with ME that is very, very informative. And just in regard to Jewish people, quite a lot of people getting in touch about that as well. At the age of 13, says Stephen in Belfast, I had a swastika painted on my locker in a Belfast city centre school, where at the time the common hatred was between Catholics and Protestants. Hatred is taught to kids at home who know no better than what their parents teach them. It's a very, very good point. I want to talk now about the NHS, because they're opening a network of mental health accident and emergency units across England in an attempt to relieve pressure on overcrowded hospitals. Well, Roy Lilly is a former NHS Trust chairman and is here to give his reaction to this. Roy, will these work? Will this help? Do you see the logic of this?
Yes, I do. I mean, people who are having a mental health crisis, the last place they need to be is in a busy, noisy, clangy A&E department. And so they are a good idea, and they're not new. There are 10 of them already that have been rolled out across the NHS. I mean, they're not cheap. I think the one in Derby cost 150 million quid to build it, but they are a good idea. And there's a bit going on in the background as well. In 2023, the police stopped attending mental health call-outs. They were going to call-outs, and then they were taking the people having whatever their Florida event was. They used to take them to a police station, which in law is a place of safety, because they didn't want to take him to A&E because of all the palaver that goes on in A&E. The trouble with that was then they had to wait for a community psychiatric team to become available and then take over the patient. And they can't leave the patient on their own because of risk of suicide and self-harm and so on. The police stopped doing that in 2023, which put the NHS in a bit of a spot. And so they had to start responding themselves. So the investment that there's been predates this government, really, to try and overcome that situation, and these hubs will be a good idea. Bear in mind, though, Peter, this is a leak from what will be the 10-year plan. Now, the 10-year plan was supposed to be out in the spring, so now it's a 9.5-year plan, effectively. And, of course, that's got a 10-year rollout. So whether we're likely to see these in the near future, I doubt it. The NHS is trying to save 6 million quid off its current budget. And now they're faced with the difference between a 4% uplift for junior doctors and nurses in the pay review body result that was announced last couple of days ago, I think. 4% broadly, that is, with only 2.8% of it funded by the Treasury. So, where the money's going to come from, I don't know. But they are a good idea.
In terms of mental health provision, obviously, that is something that you've talked about there in terms of where the money comes from. Is this just a recognition that mental health is so much more, it's such a bigger thing? It's something that many people are being diagnosed with, many people using the kind of language, I think, sometimes actually not precisely enough in terms of their mental health. And I wonder whether this is something as a provision that will actually reduce or increase the pressure on the NHS, do you think?
Well, it can. I mean, A&E, it does what it says on the tin. It's accident and emergency for people with mental health problems. And you are right. I mean, there's been a huge increase in people presenting with, inverted commas, mental health issues post-COVID. And I don't think we really kind of understand what that's all about. But GPs are reporting, huge increases in people turning up with stress and anxiety and all the things that are filed under resilience, really. And there's a question mark about what has happened to people's resilience. But as far as people with genuine mental health needs, the mental health services, frankly, have always been the Cinderella service in the NHS. The glamorous A&E, the accident emergency you see on the television, maternity service with young babies and all of that sort of attractive side. Mental health services are nothing like that. They've never been funded properly in my view, and they've never been staffed properly. I mean, there are a huge number of vacancies in mental health nursing and community psychiatric workers. It's not the most popular of professions to get into, although having run mental health services myself at one time during my career, they are the most absorbing and interesting services to be involved with, but they're not popular as a specialty.
Yeah, Roy, thank you for your thoughts there. That's Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chairman. Very interesting to talk to him this morning on this proposal for round-the-clock care for patients who are feeling suicidal or experiencing symptoms such as psychosis or mania. Specialist centres opened in 10 NHS trusts, some on the sites of existing A&Es. They're going to welcome walk-in patients and those referred from GPs and the police. This is the NHS opening a network of mental health accident and emergency units. Jackie is giving me a ring from Oldham on this. What do you think of this, Jackie? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I really, really welcome this. My background is as a retired general nurse, so I've seen people come into A&E when they're in crisis. But I also volunteered to improve health services at Mental Health Trust. And this was one of the things I was really, really pushing for.
Jackie, sorry, can I just interrupt you for a second? We've spoken on a number of occasions, and I am not even slightly surprised that you volunteered to help people in real need. And I just want to thank you for that. And please continue what you're saying. But Jackie, you're a great person, and I really appreciate the fact that you did that.
Oh, thanks, Peter. When I was a general nurse, the one thing that I saw that when people were in crisis, obviously with mental health conditions, the behaviour can become erratic, they can become emotional, and I wanted to protect their dignity. Because if you put somebody in a waiting room with all general patients and somebody's behaviour is erratic, everybody will stare. It is not the environment for people with mental health conditions. They need to feel safe, they need to feel secure, and they need to feel that they will be seen quickly, not left in a waiting room for hours, and with proper help at the other end, which can take time. It's not like general patients. It takes intensive time. So I really, really welcome this, because for too long people who have been in crisis don't know where to turn, and they've been failed by the system. So I really do think this is a good idea.
And I think you're absolutely right in that as someone who, you know, I've suffered from mental health problems for probably since I was about 16, but it was diagnosed about 15 years ago. In the time, you do need that instant care, don't you? You need that instant kind of help. But it is, as you say, it is a long-term thing. I mean, for me, it's probably going to be a lifetime thing. I'm on pills I take every day. I took pills this morning for it. Because but also once it's diagnosed and once you can see what can help you, obviously it has to be reviewed and so on, but that can be a much longer term process. And the thing is that in my limited knowledge of the NHS, Jackie, what I find is that sometimes people go to A&E and maybe these mental health A&Es as well to kind of get into the system. Sometimes, especially when an episode happens or something happens in regard to whatever illness, whether it's physical or mental. So maybe this can help people find a pathway to some sort of solution or at least a management of their problem.
Absolutely, because the emphasis was on self-referring yourself to services. Now, if you're in a crisis, you will not have the wherewithal to get on an IT system and self-refer yourself. You need proper professionals there at your disposal for when you're most in need.
Yeah. Jackie, great thoughts, and thanks just being a good person, Jackie. I appreciate you giving us a call. That's Jackie there in Oldham, former nurse who voluntarily helped so many different people and pushed for change. Louise says, great interview regarding ME. How dreadful I feel for Sean and his beautiful daughter. I've had ME for 20 years and know exactly how difficult it is to get even recognition of the illness, says Louise. Joanna in Salisbury says, Cardi P, Sean O'Neill, I quite understand where he comes from. ME and CFS are a similar problem that the NHS dismisses. You can't see it like a broken arm or a rash, so it's considered psychosomatic. It's the same as fibromyalgia that I have. Believe me, it's not in my head. Today I could climb a mountain. Tomorrow lifting a fork to my mouth is a struggle. I have friends the same. I wish they could get to the bottom of it. There isn't a single test, says John in Norwich, that can definitively diagnose ME or chronic fatigue syndrome. Instead, doctors follow a structured approach to rule out other conditions and confirm the diagnosis based on symptoms and medical history. And Jackie says the medical fraternity have always regarded ME as psychosomatic, so as they do with many conditions, they don't understand. It's a heartbreaking story, unfortunately not rare, when a person suffers so much whilst medical indifference continues. My heart goes out to the family. Well, thank you to everybody who's been in touch on that, and I'm afraid I have an apology to make to Elsa a little bit earlier on. She made some very serious points. I made a stupid joke about Elsa in Frozen because I said let it go, but she isn't letting it go. She's got some anger, she's got some annoyance, and I'm going to read out her message a little bit later on the programme, and rightly so, and I'm very happy to do that, and I'm very happy to apologise as well. I saw a silly joke to be made and I made it, but Elsa had some serious points to make, and I promise you in the 12 o'clock hour I will read out what your points are. Owen in Lancashire says, fantastic programme as usual. I'm just wondering if the Prime Minister would be able to find a way to cancel the next election in the same way some recent council elections were cancelled. Nothing would surprise me anymore, says Owen in Lancashire. Well, in fairness, Owen, they were postponed rather than cancelled necessarily, but nonetheless, you do have a reasonable point to make there. We're going to talk more in just a second to Lord Walney, John Woodcock, the former government advisor on political violence, about a number of matters political, but specifically on this Jewish protester who has been arrested and charged simply for satirising the leader of a terrorist organisation. There's lots to talk about this. We'll talk about zoos as well. Let me know your thoughts on that. Talk to you next here on Talk.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino?
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, cripes, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. Is an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the magpie, which is...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very very good afternoon. I'm really concerned about free speech in this country. Front page of the Telegraph today talking about a Jewish protester arrested for satirising the leader of a terrorist organisation. Two-tier policing? You decide. 0344 499 1000. We'll speak to Lord Wolney, the former government advisor on political violence, in just a second. We'll also get the latest from Munich on the attack there last night. A knife woman on the loose who has been arrested. We'll talk as well about new standards for modern zoo practice. What do you think about zoos? Because for too long, some say they've been misunderstood as places of entertainment, but there are new standards that the government is bringing in. We'll speak to Cam Whitnell, who's director of the Big Cat Sanctuary UK and star of CBBC's One Zoo 3. We'll talk to Cam a little bit later on. We'll take your calls, texts, voice notes as well. Coming in, lots to discuss today between now and 1 o'clock. So let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. And remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note on 0344 499 1000. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, and we'll take more calls between now and 1, because there's plenty to discuss here on Talk. Stay with us. Now, the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, really concerning story about a protester charged for mocking Hezbollah. This is a Jewish activist arrested after holding up a cartoon for 3 minutes at a demonstration. Whether he held it up for 3 minutes, 3 hours or 3 days, it shouldn't make a difference, because, yeah, it was maybe in slightly poor taste. Doesn't matter. The fact is that he was mocking the leader of Hezbollah, and he was arrested and asked. In fact, we're just going to play a little bit now of the police interview, which the Telegraph have had access to. We're playing it from their website. He was asked whether he was worried about offending people who were there because they were fans of the terrorist organisation Hezbollah. Let's just play this.
I think that showing this image to persons protesting who are clearly pro-Hezbollah and anti-Israel, that by doing so would stir up racial hatred further than it is already.
Are you saying that there were people there who were pro-Hezbollah?
That's what I'm asking. Were there?
Well, I don't know.
Is that image?
Well, you've suggested that there were, by your question, that there were people who were pro-Hezbollah. So are you saying that there were pro-Hezbollah people there because it's a prescribed terrorist organisation?
The police seem less concerned about the fact that there are people there glorifying Hezbollah, glorifying the Lebanese group that has killed and murdered many, many Jewish people and killed many of its own people as well, than someone who was holding up a satirical placard. What on earth is going on? Let's talk to Lord Wolney. He's a former government advisor on political violence. John, this is really concerning, isn't it? I mean, we just see these stories over and over again, not just about this particular issue of the Middle East, which is a serious issue we've debated and talked about many times on my programmes, but quite a number, a pernicious rise in the police not doing their job and arresting people and sometimes charging people for things that they should not have got anywhere near a charging decision.
Yes, you're right, Peter. And this latest case is genuinely quite hard to believe. And when I was first asked to comment on this in the Telegraph, I went back into, are you sure that is what has happened? And of course, that is exactly what's happened, because you've just shown the video footage of it. And it's an appalling, extraordinary mistake by the police, which now they've been confronted by it, are recognising and rowing back. But this man had the threat of a charge hanging over him for 6 months. Which does not imply that the force at the time thought it was some officer who just completely misunderstood brief and for some reason had forgotten who Hezbollah were and that they are indeed a prescribed terrorist organisation. Look, I have huge levels of sympathy for the police in the difficult task that they have when demonstrations occur. And I understand that a key part of their brief is to prevent protests from escalating into public disorder and potentially riots. But what that is driving, it would seem, is, and at times a completely disproportionate and inappropriate focus on the odd lone counter-protester who will come and say something, yes, provocative, but entirely legal. And it, as a lawyer at the time was saying, if the people being provoked are supporters of that prescribed terrorist organization, Hezbollah, then those are the people who they ought to be arrested, because that is a clear...
And there'll be many people waking up to this story today who will see it in the paper, who will hear it or watch it, this discussion, and think, hold on a second here. So in the interview, the police were clear and said, there are supporters of a prescribed terrorist organisation out there. We know they're there. We know who they are, but we're not arresting them. We're arresting you for being against the terrorists. I mean, there's so many people who see two-tier justice, talk about two-tier care, talk about all sorts of issues with the police, and these stories keep coming up again and again and again. And maybe it's cock up and not conspiracy. We can be charitable on that, John, but it doesn't exactly mean that there is a load of faith in the police. It doesn't engender that faith, does it?
That's right, and the Met have got a real problem over this, and by extension, I'm afraid government ministers need to address it as well. And I have resisted the two-tier label for a long time, but I do understand that when people see cases like this, they are totally dismayed, and I want to see Sir Mark Rowley properly addressing this, recognising that there is a problem. And I would like to see him looking at this from the perspective of, I think, officers on the ground who are just focused on stopping protests becoming disorderly, but the way in which that is driving inappropriate decisions and the knock-on effect of breaking confidence in great numbers of the public with the police themselves.
If only the government had some sort of advisor on political violence. If there was someone out there who could perhaps give them some sort of advice on this, and hadn't been, sacked essentially for talking about climate activists or pro-Palestinian groups being banned, John.
Well, fortunately for the government, I am still able to come on to your programme and give my views. And look, there was an entirely rational view of my role that I was brought in initially for 6 months to do a report. The report took about 3 years, and I stayed for a year after that. I mean, the important thing is that whether I'm in post or not, that they listen to these views. I'd like to see them acting on the recommendations that I put forward, some of which fall firmly into this space.
Well, just tell us the relevant recommendations that you've made, John.
Well, I think the police needs to be much better. Police officers on the ground needs to be much better informed about where the lines are for prescribed organisations, because you can see there, I mean, it is palpably absurd and dismal that you have an officer who is questioning someone for provoking Hezbollah supporters, but in a difficult fast-moving international environment, you can get symbols emerging which have clear relevance and point to terrorist activity. For example, do you remember, the viewers will remember that the early on, after the 7th of October, the view of hang gliders in certain circumstances was being shown by people who supported the act of Hamas terrorists who used hang gliders to go over. Now, hang gliders in of themselves, clearly not an offence at all, but could in those circumstances point towards. Now, that is a level of subtlety which you need better intelligence sharing to be able to understand. But clearly there is just a basic lack of understanding running through key parts of the force, which has to be addressed.
Yeah. John, thank you. That's John Woodcock, Lord Walney there, former Government Advisor on Political Violence. Metropolitan Police spokesman said, "We take support for proscribed organisations very seriously. Since October 2023, we have made 28 arrests under the Terrorism Act for offences at protests, including wearing clothing or displaying symbols that indicated support for such groups, including Hezbollah. This is in addition to the hundreds of arrests made for other offences." I think there are probably more than 28 people who should have been arrested, if I'm brutally frank. Elsa, I promised you I would read out your message. My anger is about the treatment of pensioners, the cover-up of young girls being raped by Muslim gangs, wealthy taxpayers fleeing the country, and that's just for starters. Anyone who's not angry about this Labour government is living in cloud cuckoo land. I live outside the UK and despair at what's happening to the country I love. There seems to be a consensus growing within talk that Labour and the Lib Dems will form the next government. Ian Collins hinted at this yesterday. It's not something we believe should happen necessarily. It's just something I think probably will happen. But listen, we're 4 years away from an election, Elsa, so who knows what's going to happen. If that's the case, says Elsa, it means reform has been sidelined as expected in the UK, as we know it will be gone for good. Both Labour and the Lib Dems are staunch Remainers, so it's the end of Brexit. I'm shocked but not surprised. The establishment will have its way and democracy in the UK will be well and truly dead. Well, we will see what happens. Certainly Reform UK doing really, really well. But Elsa, just repeat that apology. I was a little bit flippant about something you said earlier on, and I do apologise for that. Thank you also to Stephen in Belfast. Oh, sorry, I've read that out previously. Pete in Northampton says, "What a pleasure to hear such a high-quality debate between Andy and Peter earlier on. Different views expressed. Well, no insults. I learned a few things. Just intelligent, varied discussion. Well done," says Pete in Northampton. Well, thank you, Pete. I really appreciate that. There are lots of people getting in touch with voice notes. We're going to play those in a second. But I want to go just briefly now to Hamburg, because 18 people were injured in a knife attack yesterday at the main railway station in the German city. Hamburg police said on Saturday 4 of the victims had sustained life-threatening injuries, were in a stable condition. I want to go now to James Jackson. He's a journalist in Hamburg and host of the Mad in Germany podcast. James, thank you for joining me today. Just bring us up to date with what has happened over the last 24 hours in Hamburg.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me on. I'm actually in Berlin.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
Yeah. No problem. Covering Hamburg, this story, which is, of course, very shocking. We've had so many knife attacks in Germany in the last year that, I've actually lost count. And I mean, where not just knife attacks as in knife crime like you have in London, which is also a rising problem here, but where strangers are attacked and groups of strangers are attacked. And I actually think, 18 people being stabbed is it's so many. And then the most surprising part of this, it was a German woman, 39 years old, who was known to the police, appeared to be in a state of mental distress. There's no evidence that she acted with anyone else or any sort of terrorism aspect. And actually, if you go back a few months, there was a really nasty fatal stabbing in Aschaffenburg, where a little girl was killed and a bystander who tried to help was killed by a Afghan asylum seeker. And, I think he has also been declared not fit for trial. So I wonder, in Germany, is there a sort of mental health crisis that's become a security crisis?
She's in police custody, scheduled to appear in court at some stage today. Obviously, Hamburg is an incredibly busy city. This was the main railway station, and many people will be very, very worried about this. What do we know about the victims?
Well, as you said, 18 people were stabbed, and 4 of them are seriously injured, fighting for their lives in hospital. Others, you might have seen on the screen there was just blood pouring out of people. It seems unbelievable that a sort of woman, quite small, she didn't look particularly large, could injure so many people. But I think, as you said, it's because Hamburg train station is just so busy, so many people there. She seems to have sort of gone into a rage of some kind. The police are actually investigating if drugs and alcohol were in the mix. As I said, she was known to police and is now psychiatric. Thankfully, no one has died, but as I said, 4 people are fighting for their lives, so that could change.
Well, let's hope it doesn't. Let's hope they make a full recovery. Thank you for your thoughts on that. James Jackson there in Berlin, reporting on what happened in Hamburg. And the critically injured include a 24-year-old woman, a 24-year-old man, a 52-year-old woman, and an 85-year-old woman. They are stable as of this morning. Let's hope they make a full recovery. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including Sarah in Kent, who says, I'm just wondering if people are still allowed to speak openly at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, or are the police there waiting to arrest them? Leslie says, do you think anyone posting a picture of Diane Abbott or David Lammy portrayed as coconuts would not face the full force of the law? Says Leslie. And Nadine in Ayrshire says, Cardi P, I don't think the police two-tier system is coming from the top, but from a complete lack of training in these areas, which sadly means that individual policemen and women are simply bringing their own political views into the workplaces and acting upon them. Their leaders are far too scared to talk about what may or may not be acceptable politically on our streets. That's Nadine in Ayrshire, and thank you for that, Nadine. Appreciate that. We've got a load of voice notes. We're going to get through some of them after the next break, because there's lots of people in touch on all sorts of issues. Gaza, on Andy Williams, on why we put up with the government, about the police as well. Lots to discuss here on Talk.
At so many different levels, with the EU, with the Chagos deal, with mass immigration, this country has been opened up and been essentially violated by successive governments. And when you see people, accusing people of gravitating towards the right, voting reform, the government is effectively radicalising the British people. And if there wasn't a party like Reform for that outlet of resentment and rage and anger to be put into a democratic, peaceful avenue, if that wasn't there, I really worry about the state of affairs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Well, thanks to everybody who's been in touch with voice notes. We've had a couple so far, but not in these quantities, believe me. We're going to get through a few of them in the next few minutes, because there's lots of opinions that you want to get on the air, and whether you give me a ring or sending me a voice note, sending it through WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Darren has the first one on Gaza.
Morning, Peter. Darren from Suffolk. Great show. I'm not religious, but I have one question. Why aren't the people who are demonstrating on the streets of London, and around the world singing the same tune as the people on the streets of Gaza. Right now they are chanting, Hamas out, 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 Hamas out. Even the BBC, who were late to the game reporting this, have reported it yesterday that it's the third day of these demonstrations. Why aren't the people in the streets of London and around the world chanting Hamas out, Hamas out? It's the same message. They're not, because maybe they're anti-Semitic rather than on the side of the Gaza people. Leave that with you.
Darren, brilliant. You're the first one of this crop of voice notes that we're playing, but it'll be hard to top that because you speak absolute sense. And if you support the Palestinian people, I of course support them. I support them. I want them to live in peace. I want them to live in harmony. Well, how can they do that? They can do that without Hamas. And if you genuinely support Palestinian people, you will be anti-Hamas and you will be very vocal about being anti-Hamas, and you will want peace, maybe even democracy, to come to Gaza. Very, very good points there, Darren. And also, I think what it also shows is that there are a heck of a lot of people on those marches who just don't have the first idea what Hamas are actually like, because they're willfully ignorant of the brutality, the maiming, the killing, the burning, the gang rapes, the horrendous things that Hamas did on the 7th of October, because they just don't want to know. And that is very worrying. Darren, great thoughts. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Judith is next.
Peter, hi, it's Judith here from Radlett. Just listening to your show. I'm so sorry you were subjected to that incident yesterday with a man accusing you of, or demonstrating with you in a nasty, nasty way that made you feel so uncomfortable. I fear for all of you, and I've said that on talk, because you've been so supportive of what's happening to us on the London streets and on any street really in the country. And I just fear that things will happen to you guys. And I want to say thank you to Talk for still, trying to be supportive to us and putting the other side and explaining that there is no 14,000 genocide babies dying in, 24 hours? I was so heartbroken when that went on the BBC. And as if it was fact. It wasn't true. None of it's true. And it breaks my heart. And as you say, they never retracted and say we were wrong, that was unfounded. And I know your station is doing everything you can to put the other side, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Peter, stay safe, and the same to all your wonderful presenters. Please look after yourselves.
Thank you, Judith. That's a really, really kind message. I just shared the story simply because it happened to me, and also because I think it shows that, people feel they can do this. People feel they can just go up and start shouting at someone because they have an opinion different to theirs. We are the home of free speech, and I believe in free speech, and that person was exercising their free speech. They weren't doing it in a particularly nice way, and they did it in a threatening way, which made me feel really uncomfortable. But Judith, you're very kind in what you say. You're correct in what you say and those factual points you're putting forward. The other thing I would say is that, the abuse I had yesterday for a minute was like 1% of what most Jewish people, or a heck of a lot of Jewish people in this country, go through. I'm not Jewish, and especially if you're, I hate this phrase, but sort of visibly Jewish, if people wear a skull cap, or if they have outward signs of their faith, well, they're much more likely to be discriminated against, affected and attacked, and that is just an absolutely awful thing. So I'm not saying woe is me, wasn't that awful. There are worse things that have happened to me in my life. But Judith, I really appreciate the solidarity and many people getting in touch as a result as well. It's not about me, it's about the wider issue, but it is an illustration of the wider issue as well. Nick's been in touch with a voice note as well. Here's what Nick has to say.
Just heard your exchange with Andy Williams. Andy Williams actually is a left-wing commentator who I can listen to. He debates with reason and decency. But his parting shot was Starmer has a massive majority and should just home in on one or two issues and get them done. What that doesn't address is the fact that while Starmer does have a huge majority, it is paper thin. And whatever he does, he's only going to appease 20% of the population that voted for him. This government is trying to govern a country, most of whom never supported him. Have a good day, Pete.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. And you make a lot of very, very good points there. And I don't think post-war, actually, post-Second World War, there's been a single government that's actually had a majority of people, but certainly the vote share of people who actually turned out and voted. Nick's right in that around 20% of people in the country, of the people who turned out to vote, about a third of them voted Labour. And you've got to remember, of course, that it is so incredibly important to vote. And anybody who says it isn't important to vote, we'll tell that to the people of Runcorn and Hellsby. 6 votes is Sarah Pouchin's majority, the Reform UK MP. Simon has been in touch with a voice note as well.
Good morning, Peter. It's Simon from a sunny Devon. I do tire of the British people, Joe Normie, being blamed for spreading untruths and things like that on social media. Just look at who was responsible for putting out the fact that 14,000 babies were under threat of being starved in Gaza. It was the BBC. It was the United Nations. Look at who was putting out the propaganda on the other side after the October the 7th attacks about tens or hundreds of babies being beheaded. It was Israeli government. Our governments are to blame for lies. Look at the COVID situation, all the misinformation, all the lies that were spread during the COVID time. I do tire of Joe Normie getting the blame for just pressing a retweet when really our established media and governments are the ones pushing the whole lies. Anyway, Peter, I'll carry on with my walk with my dog. Have a great day. Love your programme. Thank you. Simon,
thanks for that, and I hope you had a lovely walk. I'm going to slightly push back on what you're saying. First of all, you're right, and when you have an organisation like the United Nations that people instinctively trust, I don't think we should, but instinctively trust it and say, well, the United Nations say this, therefore it should be true. Their relief chief, his actual Twitter is @UN Relief Chief, Tom Fletcher. He said 14,000 babies in Gaza will die of starvation in the next 48 hours if Israel doesn't do what we want them to do. That was a lie. That was completely untrue. And that is someone who's in a senior position who should know better. He said it on the Today programme on Radio 4 on the BBC. 13 parliamentarians in this country repeated that lie. That is factually untrue. Now, Simon, here is where we slightly diverge. So Joe Public, man on the street, woman on the street, whatever, if you retweet something, check it. Okay, if you're going to tweet something, if you're going to put an opinion out there, or you're going to say, 27% of this, that, or the other, check it. Check that you're right. Don't just, I heard that on the radio, or I saw that on the TV, or I read it in the newspaper, read it online, therefore it must be true. Just do a bit of a Google, just look into the source of it, just make sure you're right. I make mistakes all the time. I'm a journalist. Journalists, first draft of history, we make mistakes. We should own up to them a lot more than we do. Governments, as Simon says, should own up to these things a lot more than they do. Organisations like the United Nations need to absolutely own up to their mistakes far more than they do. But everybody, whether you're a very powerful person, whether you have no power whatsoever, everyone is incredibly important in that we have an equal voice when it comes to Twitter, for example. Everyone is equal. Everyone has the same number of characters in order to make their point, can be followed by as many people as you like. And the key thing we've got to do is to make sure that what we put out there is true, and everybody has a responsibility, whether you're Tom Fletcher of the UN, or whether you're me, or whether you're you, Simon. Everyone has a responsibility for that. So we mostly agree, Simon, I think, and we can certainly agree that a walk with a dog is a lovely thing, and I hope you had a really, really nice day. We're going to talk about zoos in a second. Animal welfare rules in British zoos set for a major overhaul. We've got Cam Withnall, who is director of the Big Cat Sanctuary UK and star of CBBC's One Zoo 3, will be with us in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you everyone for your company today, and also for all the messages that are coming in. If you want to give me a ring between now and 1 o'clock, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can send me a voice note on that number as well. You can send me a text message on 87222 with the word talk in your text, or you can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. I want to talk about something now about what the government is doing about animal welfare rules. You know I'm a big cat person, and I like dogs as well. In fact, I'm writing a book about them at the moment. But actually, animal welfare rules in British zoos are set for a major overhaul. And I go back and forward on zoos a bit. I've been to Kruger Park in South Africa. I was very, very privileged to go there when I was a lot younger and seeing animals sort of essentially in their natural habitat on these huge reserves, and the animals looked after brilliantly. And then, you know, going to zoos after that, I think, well, these are so much smaller, and sometimes the welfare of those animals, is that something that actually you want to support by going there? But there's been a major update in rules for keeping animals in zoos, as the government is introducing new standards which are going to ensure that the UK's famous zoos remain global leaders. Let's talk to Cam Whitnell now, who is a director of the Big Cat Sanctuary UK and star of CBBC's One Zoo 3. Cam, what would you say to people who are perhaps a little bit nervous about going to zoos, who say, actually, hold on a second, are the animals being looked after properly there?
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that. Look, we live in a world where there's good and bad in everything. So there are bad zoos, but there are also incredibly good zoos. And I think there's a huge misunderstanding with zoos. But I think with these new standards being set, I think it's pretty clear that animals will come first. And it is about conservation, education, welfare research, science. There's such a source for good. You know, when you look at I know you mentioned about going to Kruger Park, and I've been around the world. I've been fortunate enough to see species in their natural environments, but I've also seen the worst of that as well, and the impacts that they're facing. And zoos are now, together as a community, changing that and supporting animals in their natural environment, and also educating children and future generations about wildlife, because in 10, 20, 30 years' time, we may lose species. And without zoos, I think that's going to be accelerated.
And what do you think the point of having zoos in our society today is? Because, you know, you've said in this press release, really interesting, you're talking about zoos have been sort of misunderstood as places of entertainment. I mean, for some people that's what they are. It is, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. Bring the kids out, see the animals and so on. But of course, many people worry about those standards. So just tell us a little bit about what's happening today and why the standards are being are rising as a result of what the government is doing.
Yeah, I think with the standards, I think it's important that zoos need to adhere to the highest welfare standards possible. I mean, animals are in environments, in zoos, sanctuaries, rescues, wildlife parks, safari parks, whatever it may be. But, you know, it's important. We have to keep progressing, and we're always going to learn more about the animals under our care. And, you know, there's going to be tight restrictions on touch pools and aquariums. By 2040, elephants will obviously need better and larger spaces, which is absolutely fair. Tethering of birds is going to be phased out by 2030. They're all important steps. And I'll be honest, a lot of zoos, like good zoos, are already meeting these standards and already going above and beyond. It's for the others that need to step up now and make those changes.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about your story, Cam, because obviously you're the director of the Big Cat Sanctuary UK. You're a star of the CBBC's One Zoo 3 as well. How did you get into big cats and the welfare of animals?
Yeah, look, it all started with my family, actually. My nan and granddad owned a bus and coach company in the 80s, and they needed somewhere to park them. So they came across Broxbourne Zoo, which was the worst zoo in the UK. They had a chimpanzee that was chained up smoking a cigarette. They had a lion called Bobby who had never been on grass before in his life, only ever knew concrete in tiny 4x4 scaffolding poles. From there, they fell in love with the animals. They sold off their bus and coach company and purchased the zoo and decided to give animals a better home and a better chance. So the first thing was to build Bobby the lion a new home where he could run outside for the first time in his life. on grass, which is special. From there, they built up the zoo to be a brilliant zoo today, Hertfordshire Zoo. And in 2000, his passion was big cats. So he set up the sanctuary, the Big Cat Sanctuary in Kent. And I've been fortunate enough to follow in his footsteps, in my mum's footsteps, my dad's. I work with my two brothers, and we run both the Big Cat Sanctuary and Hertfordshire Zoo and support conservation projects all around the world. And 1 Zoo 3, our CBBC show, we use that as a tool of education to inspire the future generations, because they're the ones that are going to save the planet. You know, it's too late for older people now. So it comes down to the future generation, the ones that, you know, I don't want to be 80 and look back and think, I wish I did more for wildlife, because they are vanishing at such an unprecedented rate. It's like, I think the Living Planet report in 2022 stated that since 1970, species have declined by like 69% in the wild. You know, it's a rapid decline. So we need to do more for wildlife. And I know obviously we're talking about zoos today, but obviously zoos impact that, because zoos are a force for good. They're educating people on the threats that animals are facing and what people can do to also, you know, help out and support. And just through my TikTok and social medias, I try and also educate people on the work that zoos are doing and the threats that animals are facing in the wild.
You've done a documentary as well, haven't you? You produced, directed and edited a documentary called Zoospiracy, Captivity for Conservation. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, that was actually a university project, because, you know, it's my passion, wildlife and zoos, sanctuaries. So I just wanted to put a small documentary together to look at the pros and cons of zoos. And it's interesting looking back at that documentary and seeing the changes that have been made, and looking at the standards that have been released today, which Zoo supported the government with, and DEFRA and other organisations, to make us, literally, Britain, the best welfare standards possible for zoos globally. So it's a huge win. It's great for wildlife.
I know you're a big cat person, but are you a little cat person as well? Do you like domestic cats? I'm a big cat person.
I'm obsessed with all animals. It doesn't matter what the animal is. I love them all.
Excellent, excellent. Cam, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you, Cam Whitnell, there, director of the Big Cat Sanctuary UK and star of CBBC's 1 Zoo 3. I think I might have to get in touch with him about my book and see if he can give me a cover quote for it. Listen, Tanya in Exeter has been in touch, 0344 499 1000. Tanya, you have some thoughts on zoos?
Yeah, get rid of them. I mean, that's just wrong. It's putting animals in prison, and it's the same old arguments that are always used. Obviously, but he didn't have zoos, all these animals would go extinct. The point is, that's irrelevant. Why are we putting animals in prison? Let nature take its course. You don't need to. And especially, I don't think it was ever excused, but in the age of the internet, if you're talking about children's education, they can blooming well look on a screen, and they can save up when they're big to go and travel to these places. They don't need animals in zoos, okay? And it's wrong. We should not be putting them in prison. I also think whoever first thought of putting a bird in a cage was ridiculous, and, you know, that's a shame that's not phased out, because, I mean, putting something with wings in a cage is moronic in the first place. No, sorry, I'm never going to agree with it. I'm sick of the tired old worn arguments that it's for conservation. Rubbish. Put your stuff into conserving wildlife and helping wildlife as much as possible. Why do we need zoos? We don't need zoos anymore, not in this day and age.
What would you say to the argument that pandas probably wouldn't exist if we hadn't put them in zoos?
Well, if God doesn't want pandas to exist, he won't have pandas existing. But I don't buy that argument anyway. But that argument to me is irrelevant, because it's not down to human beings what other animals exist in this world. It's not our choice. We might see ourselves, oh, we're the big God who can tell everyone else what they should exist. No, that's not up to us. You know, nature takes care of itself, and what is meant to survive will survive. What isn't. We don't need prisons for pandas. We don't need prisons.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, don't apologise. You're more than entitled to your opinion. Tanya in Exeter there, thank you for that. That's Tanya giving her thoughts, thinking that zoos shouldn't exist. What do you think about this? 0344 499 1000. Let's play a couple more voice notes actually just before the break. Nadine has been in touch about the police.
Hi, Peter. Nadine from Ayrshire. Peter, you just mentioned the case of this Jewish man that was arrested because of his placard regarding Hezbollah. And you talked about who's training these people in the police. I think the problem here, which is missed by a lot of people, is that they're not being trained. I think these policemen who are acting in this way, are doing so because they bring their own political views from home into work. And the leaders at work are far too scared to talk about politics in any way whatsoever. It's obviously wokeism, that has entered the police, and that's been going on for years, and it's got worse and worse and worse. So there is no training about how to behave with regard to these things, and I think it's all about the individual policemen. They are bringing their own political views into the workspace and acting upon them. Thank you.
Nadine, thanks for your thoughts there. Really appreciate it. You think you speak a lot of sense. I know you're from Ayrshire. You're not sounding very Scottish there. We have someone in our newsroom, actually, I call Ted, who pretends to be Scottish even though he has an English accent. Neil has been in touch on the NHS.
Hi, Peter. I've been a psychiatric nurse for nearly 32 years. Worked in the NHS. I've worked in inpatient A&E community. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, the NHS is in a worse state now than it's been throughout my career. There are no beds, social care there are no services in terms of packages of care, residential. In my local area of Southport, it truly is a disaster. Thanks again, Peter.
Neil, thanks for your thoughts there. It's very sobering to just remember that there's so much provision that needs to occur that doesn't. On zoos, Pat's been in touch and says, most zoos do an amazing job in conservation, and I enjoy taking my family to see all of the different species. The most shocking zoo was in China. I went because I wanted to see their pandas. It was a terrible experience. The pandas were just sitting in concrete enclosures, and I believe there was a dog fighting going on in an area that you had to pay for to go to in a huge enclosed pen. I did not go to this, but was horrified at the thought, says Pat. I think I agree with you, Pat, that some of the standards, I use the word very loosely, that China has had in many other parts of the world when it comes to animal welfare are just so low and so dreadful. And there are people like Cam Whitnell actually who are trying to drive those standards up. I go backwards and forwards on zoos. I'm not quite as strong as Tanya on it. I probably wouldn't go to a zoo myself any longer, but then I've gone to look at animals in the wild in South Africa, as I said, when I lived there many years ago, about 20 years ago. That's something that people do, but then they're cared for really, really well and have, a huge amount of natural habitat to go into. In fact, the Kruger Park in South Africa that I mentioned there is actually the size of Wales. So there's an awful lot in this. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Politics is happening this week, of course. Parliament is off at the moment, but it continues because Angela Rayner doing an awful lot behind the scenes. Mysteriously, some of her plans on tax have made it into the public domain. What's really going on, and how strong are Reform UK, and how likely is what we were talking about a little bit earlier on, a coalition perhaps between Labour and the Liberal Democrats to make sure, in their belief that reform shouldn't be the government of this country, will democracy be allowed to ensue, and what does that even look like? We'll talk to Joe Twyman of Delta Pool in just a second. Stay with us.
so many different levels, with the EU, with the Chagos deal, with mass immigration. This country has been opened up and been essentially violated by successive governments. And when you see people, accusing people of gravitating towards the right, voting reform, the government is effectively radicalising the British people. And if there wasn't a party like Reform for that outlet of resentment and rage and anger to be put into a democratic, peaceful avenue, if that wasn't there, I really worry about the state of affairs.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you everyone who's been in touch, including Angela, who says Jackie from Manchester is, I think it's Oldham actually, but yeah, close enough, is the type of person you would want in times of personal crisis. You can hear her empathy and wanting to help people. Maybe that's why she will make a great ambassador for Reform UK. I know she's a member. In fact, Angela, Jackie is going to stand for Reform UK in the forthcoming elections. Now, obviously, I would not say that anybody should vote for anybody, because that would be a breach of electoral law and Ofcom. All I will say, as a seasoned political watcher and indeed participant, is that Jackie will be a very strong candidate. Anthony says, I'm concerned that the NHS is upgrading its mental health services in the UK. I guarantee that before long, assisted dying will be offered as a solution. Well, Anthony, let's hope it isn't. But certainly, if they're upgrading mental health services, I think that's probably a good thing. But listen, there is a debate to be had about it, certainly. This person says it's easy to diagnose or blame a mental health problem for symptoms of ME. I knew someone who had a brain tumour that was dismissed because of mental health issues, and someone who had a thyroid problem dismissed for mental health problems. Must have someone who checks the physical side as well. Kerry says, Peter, I hope you're well. Regarding the police, it's easier for them to appease the terrorist sympathisers. They are vile and violent when challenged. In my opinion, the police are weak. They have no pride in our country, our values, and no respect for the people of Britain. Peter Mortel has been in touch in regard to this story that we're talking about the man who was arrested simply for satirising the leader of a terrorist organisation, Hezbollah. Peter says the poster he was holding made fun of terrorist attacks which harmed innocent bystanders. How sick have people become to say that is fine? It's like celebrating the IRA. Another person says antisemitism is illegal. Hezbollah are a proscribed terrorist organisation. Police action in this case is wrong and utterly insane. Let me know your thoughts on that. We've about 10 minutes of the programme left, and I want to talk to Joe Twyman now. He is King of Polls and director of Delta Poll, the co-founder of that organisation as well. Joe, great to talk to you. A lot around politically today. Angela Rayner allegedly on manoeuvres in the Labour Party. What's her level of sort of name recognition, and were she to challenge Keir Starmer in some way, would people put their faith in her? He clearly, of course, has negative numbers, and maybe you just explain that about favourables versus unfavourables. But I just wonder if you do have challengers to Keir Starmer, not that they've emerged officially at the moment, but if there were challengers to emerge, maybe Angela Rayner, maybe Wes Streeting, how would the public react to that?
Well, to answer the overall question, the general public don't like parties that are divided. And that is true regardless of the party that we're talking about. It's just not seen as a good thing. And that was something that the Conservatives had a lot of problems with at various points in their time in office, but particularly in the last couple of years. All the kind of infighting, whether it was around Brexit or any other kind of issue, that is the sort of thing that the public don't want to see. When it comes to the Labour Party, Keir Starmer is deep in negative territory. In other words, there are far more people that believe he's doing a bad job than believe he's doing a good job. Now, it's worth pointing out that historically speaking, it is very unusual for a Prime Minister, particularly in between elections, very unusual for a Prime Minister to be in positive territory, but Keir Starmer is a long way from that. By historical standards, he's not doing well at all. But there are 4 years until a general election, and a lot can happen between now and then. And one of those things could, theoretically at least, be a change in leader. But when it comes to the Labour Party, really, Keir Starmer, yes, people recognise him. His position as Prime Minister gives him a certain level of name recognition, and people could pick him out in the street. But even then, it's only around 2/3 of people that say they could pick out Keir Starmer if he were to pass them in the street. When you come to basically any other person in Labour, it falls right back. And so whether it's Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves, or any of the other people that could potentially replace Keir Starmer, none of them have any kind of name recognition at all, really. But having said that, that's not particularly unusual, and the Conservatives arguably are in a much worse position. Labour are at least have the recognition that comes with being in government. Conservatives don't have even that. Reform UK, obviously Nigel Farage is well known and recognised. He's been around an extremely long time, but beyond that, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who the general public recognise. So this is not a problem unique to Labour. It's really a matter of the way that politics works nowadays.
What are Kemi Badenoch's numbers? You mentioned there about a lack of recognition and a lack of popularity with her. The Conservatives languishing in one YouGov poll, we talked about it the other day, on 16%. How can she claw things back, and what's the perception of her out there?
Well, Kemi Badenoch's numbers are not as bad as Keir Starmer's, but a lot of that is to do with the fact that she has a large proportion of people who say they don't know whether she's doing a good or a bad job. And so she, similarly, is deep in negative territory. She has more than a quarter of people saying they just don't know. Now, if you're being generous to Kemi Badenoch, you'd say, that is an opportunity. Those people can be convinced that she is the best person to lead Britain after the next general election. But if you're being critical, or one might say more realistic, you could say it's a reflection of the fact that since the general election and since she became leader, she hasn't really been able to cut through all of the noise and all of the attention that has been placed on other political figures, not just within Labour and the new government, but also with people like Nigel Farage. She has simply found it a very crowded marketplace and has been unable to get her views, her opinions, her positions across in the way that I'm sure she would like.
Just finally, a bit of speculation, mainly by me, that there could, in theory, be a Labour-Lib Dem coalition after the next election. Obviously, it's 4 years away. A great man once told me that apparently polls are just a snapshot of what the public think on any given day. But given the information we have at the moment, it's not out of the realms of possibility, is it?
Well, I mean, if the last 10, 15 years have taught us anything, Peter, it's that
nothing's outside the realms of possibility politically. Yeah.
So that's an important thing. When it comes to the Lib Dems, they have changed their rules since 2010 to make it far more difficult to enter an official coalition, the kind of which we saw with the Conservatives in 2010. And so if there was some sort of agreement, I imagine that it would be less formal and more sort of agreement on a legislation by legislation basis. But that is a long way away. And of course, before you get there, you have the election itself. And it may be, and as I say, we're only speculating here, but it may be that the Lib Dems perhaps decide to go less hard on some of the constituencies where they think they're less likely to win next time around, if they think Labour have a chance. And similarly, Labour may try with less enthusiasm in certain seats where they think the Lib Dems are going to win. I think that kind of agreement is more likely.
You're absolutely right, Joe, and these things can be formal, informal, and done in all sorts of different ways. Joe, thank you. That's Joe Twyman there, the co-founder of Delta Pool. Appreciate him joining us today. Jill's in Cornwall. Jill, just a couple of minutes left. What would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Good morning, Peter. I don't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just don't like her either. I think that the pair of them are exactly the same.
I think you're talking about Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer here.
It wouldn't make any difference which one of them were the leaders. I'm sorry, it doesn't make any difference as far as I'm concerned.
You think they're just both the same, Jill?
Well, the party, yes. I mean, she's followed along with everything he suggested, and before they actually won the election, she was high in the news for her behaviour not exactly being what you would call good.
Well, exactly.
And the fact that she might take over from him does not make it any better than him being in the lead. So I'm sorry. I feel that. It doesn't matter which one of them stands up and says they want to lead. It's the party politics that I'm concerned about, and it's through the party.
Jill, thanks for your thoughts there. That's Jill in Cornwall there. Always good to sneak in another call, just as many as we can, of course, before the end of the programme. James in Kent's been in touch and says, why the comment on Nadine from Ayrshire's accent? Does every Northern Irish person have a Northern Irish accent? Does every Londoner have a Cockney accent? Maybe I'm a Londoner, James, these days. I've lived here for the majority of my adult life. I certainly don't have a London accent. Does every Birmingham native have a Brummie accent? No to all. I like you a lot, but that was a lazy comment, says James. James, I think that's a fair comment, and I will certainly take it on the chin. Francis said, your caller, Tanya from Essex, is so misguided about nature's ability to take care of animal populations. Of course, bad zoos should never be allowed to exist, but conservation is essential for wildlife that is threatened by human activities. And Tony in Essex says, Tanya's wrong. It is down to humans if these animals exist, especially with poaching. It is not God who is letting them die out, it's humans killing them or destroying their habitat. If we could stop poaching and wanton habitat destruction, there would not be a need for zoos. And Paul says, I sort of agree about the no zoo thing, but what happens to all the animals in the zoo? They can't be released into the wild again, so castrate and neuter every animal so they die out in captivity. How's your stop the zoos and see if the animals work then?